There is a town in America that does not appear on any map. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for decades, a harbor, a gorge, mountains, an ocean, a monorail that was built in a weekend, and a billionaire who has been alive since before the invention of the automobile. The people who live there have yellow skin, 4 fingers on each hand, and eyes that bulge slightly beyond what human anatomy should allow. Their fish have 3 eyes. Their dogs have the same proportions as their owners. Their children have been the same age for 36 years. And every single Sunday night, for 36 years, hundreds of millions of people around the world have sat down, turned on the television, and gone home to that town. Not because it makes sense, because it feels like home, because somewhere in the yellow light of that living room on Evergreen Terrace, something is true about us that we can't quite find anywhere else. Tonight, we are going back, all the way back, through every scandal, every buried secret, every theory that the writers have danced around for decades without ever quite saying out loud. We are going to sit inside Springfield for a while, and let it wash over us, and see what it looks like when you stop accepting the surface and start pulling at what's underneath. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while, and that is exactly the point. Number Section 1, The Nuclear Secret Springfield's Poisoned Foundation. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of the problem. The thing that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. The thing that sits at the center of Springfield like a cracked reactor at the center of a town that was never supposed to survive this long. The Springfield nuclear power plant. It has been there since the first episode. It dominates the skyline. It employs half the town. It is owned by one man, operated by dozens of underpaid and underqualified workers, and it is by any reasonable measurement one of the most dangerous industrial facilities in the history of fictional storytelling. And that is not an exaggeration. That is the show telling you, episode after episode, decade after decade, in explicit and unmistakable terms, that something is very wrong with the building that powers the town. Start with the basics. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It generates the electricity that keeps every light on in Springfield. Without it, the town does not function. Every home, every school, every hospital, every bar, every quickie mart, all of it runs on power that flows from that cracked and leaking facility. Which means the entire town is dependent, completely and inescapably, on a building that should have been shut down decades ago. The evidence is not subtle. A surprise safety inspection conducted at the plant found 342 violations. 342. Not 3, not 12. Not a number that could be written off as oversight or bureaucratic backlog. 342 separate, documented failures. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to regulatory code was $56 million. A number that, for a billionaire many times over, amounts to something close to pocket change. And Charles Montgomery Burns, the man who owns the plant, who has owned it for longer than most of its employees have been alive, refused to spend it. Not because he could not afford it, he could. The reason Burns refused was far more interesting and far more disturbing. Fixing the problems would mean admitting that the problems existed. And admitting that the problems existed would mean that someone, somewhere, might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people who lived in the town below. And those questions, if they were ever truly asked, could not be answered in any way that was good for Charles Montgomery Burns. So, the violations continued, and they were not minor. This is important to understand. These were not paperwork violations. These were not administrative oversights. The violations included radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water that the town's residents used for recreation and, in some cases, drinking water. Radioactive waste being deposited on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk inside the facility, just sitting there, casually, irradiating whoever happened to work nearby. Cooling towers that were cracked and leaking, patched not with engineering-grade materials, not with anything that could reasonably contain radioactive output, but with a wad of chewing gum. Actual chewing gum. The kind you pull from your mouth and press into a crack and hope for the best. There were luminous rats running through the bowels of the facility. Rats that glowed, not metaphorically. The show depicts these animals with a visible glow coming off their bodies, a physical manifestation of the radiation they had absorbed simply by living inside the plant. And the plant workers treated this as background, as normal. as a thing that happened in this building and was simply part of the landscape. And then there is the detail that the show drops once, quietly, and never returns to: the skeletons. Human skeletons, found in the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant. The show does not explain who those people were. It does not explain how they came to be there. It does not explain how human remains ended up inside a working nuclear facility without anyone noticing, without anyone investigating, without anyone filing a single report or asking a single question. The bones are shown. The camera moves on. And Springfield, as it always does, simply accepts this as another piece of the landscape. Now consider who is responsible for preventing all of this. The man whose literal job title is Nuclear Safety Inspector. The man whose professional purpose is to stand between the plant's 342 violations and the population of the town below. The man who is, in the most technical and official sense, the last line of defense between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. That man is Homer J. Simpson. The show's own creator, Matt Groening, has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. 55. The clinical threshold for intellectual disability begins at around 70. Homer does not simply fall below that threshold. He falls significantly below it. He is a man who, as revealed in a later season, has been walking around with a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, a foreign object that has been physically suppressing his cognitive function for decades, and not a single doctor in Springfield ever found it, ever mentioned it, ever suggested that something might be wrong. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see what would happen to it. He has pressed buttons on the control panel out of curiosity, out of boredom, out of the simple desire to see what a button does when you press it. He has, on multiple documented occasions, initiated or nearly initiated events that would have resulted in a full-scale nuclear meltdown, and he has walked away from every single one of them, slightly singed, slightly confused, ready to do it all again tomorrow. This is the person standing between Springfield and disaster. This is the person Burns hired. And more importantly, this is the person Burns keeps hiring, keeps retaining, keeps protecting from the consequences of his own incompetence, while the plant continues to leak and the violations continue to stack, and the town below continues to drink the water and breathe the air and eat the fish from the river without the slightest awareness of what it is doing to them. The first visible sign that something is profoundly wrong with Springfield's biology appeared in the second season of the show. A fish. A three-eyed fish pulled from a river located near the power plant. A fish that the show named Blinky, a name that carries a cheerfulness wildly at odds with what Blinky actually represents. Blinky became national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate, a man running against Burns himself for the office of state governor, used Blinky as the centerpiece of his campaign argument. He held the fish up. He pointed to the three eyes. He said, plainly and in front of cameras, that this fish was what happened to living organisms when they were exposed to the radioactive output of Burns's facility. He said the river was poisoned. He said the man who owned the plant was poisoning Springfield. Burns was forced to respond. His campaign held a dinner event at which Burns consumed the fish on live television, eating Blinky in front of the cameras to demonstrate that the fish was perfectly safe, that the whole thing was an overreaction, that the three eyes were not a sign of mutation but simply a charming quirk of Springfield's local wildlife. The town watched. The town considered. And then the town moved on. Nobody conducted a follow-up study on the river. Nobody tested the water. Nobody organized a community health assessment to determine whether the population had been affected by whatever had given Blinky his third eye. Nobody asked the obvious and devastating question that was sitting right there in front of them. If the fish who live in the river have three eyes, what is happening to the people who drink the water from the same source? The answer has been accumulating in the background of the show ever since. Consider the residents of Springfield. Look at them carefully. Not as cartoon characters, but as a population. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that defies normal human biology. His eyes bulge. His overbite is severe. His fingers number 4 on each hand. His IQ, as we have discussed, places him in the range of significant intellectual impairment, and this is before accounting for the crayon that was physically reducing his cognitive function for decades. He has survived injuries that, in any realistic biological context, would have killed him 10 times over. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen from cliffs, been struck by multiple vehicles, survived explosions at close range, been subjected to physical trauma that would be immediately fatal for any normal human being, and he walks away. Every time. His body absorbs damage with an efficiency and a resilience that has no biological explanation. Unless the explanation is biological, unless the explanation is that Homer's body, saturated by decades of proximity to the reactor core, exposed to whatever the plant has been leaking into the town's water and air for his entire adult life, has adapted, has mutated, has become something that looks like a human body but operates on fundamentally different rules. Marge Simpson, same bulging eyes, same 4 fingers. Her hair grows straight upward in a tower that maintains its exact form and height across decades without any visible structural support, defying gravity and physics in a way that nobody in Springfield has ever commented on. Marge was briefly employed at the plant herself. She walked those same corridors. She was exposed to the same environment, the same violations, the same radiation that seeps through cracked concrete and rusted pipes. And her 3 children, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, were all conceived and born in Springfield by parents who had already spent years absorbing whatever the plant was putting into the town's ecosystem. Bart has the hair, the spiky, immovable structure that sits on top of his head without product, without styling, without any logical explanation for why it maintains that exact shape. Lisa has the overbite, the eyes, the 4 fingers. Maggie, barely 1 year old, already displays every physical characteristic that marks a Springfield resident as distinct from everyone who grew up somewhere else. And here is the detail that makes the whole theory snap into focus. When characters from outside Springfield visit the town, celebrities, guest stars, characters who are established as coming from somewhere else, they look different. Not in a subtle, easily dismissed way, in a structurally different way. Their proportions are closer to realistic human anatomy. Their eyes do not bulge in the same way. Their features carry a different geometry. The show draws outsiders with a noticeably different visual language than it uses for Springfield residents. The accepted explanation for this is artistic style. The Simpsons characters look the way they look because that is the show's aesthetic. The outsiders look different because they are drawn with more naturalistic proportions to make them feel like they come from outside the show's visual universe. But that explanation, while technically accurate about the production process, does not hold up when you apply it to the logic of the show's own world. Within Springfield's universe, there is an observable, visible, physical difference between people who have spent their lives inside the town and people who have not. The people inside what the government would later classify as a contamination zone exhibit physical characteristics that do not appear in the general population. The people outside that zone do not exhibit those characteristics. If this were a documentary, and not a cartoon, that difference would be called evidence of environmental exposure. The animals confirm it. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family greyhound, has the same bulging eyes, the same proportional deviations that distinguish Springfield residents from everyone else. He was adopted in Springfield. He has lived in Springfield. He drinks the same water, breathes the same air, and his biology reflects the same pattern that appears in his owners. Blinky was not an anomaly. Blinky was a data point. The show told you this explicitly, in Season 2, in full color, on network television in front of millions of viewers. It held up a 3-eyed fish and said, "This is what the radiation from that plant is doing to the living organisms of Springfield." And then, with perfect consistency, it expected you to believe that the humans living in the same environment had been entirely unaffected. Burns has always known. This is not speculation. The show establishes Burns' awareness across multiple episodes and makes it explicit in ways that are easy to miss only if you are not looking for them. Burns funds private medical research at a level far beyond what even a man of his wealth would require for standard healthcare. He has personal physicians. He undergoes a weekly medical treatment, a regimen so intensive, so loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes his entire body to emit a visible green glow for a period following each session. The Springfield Files, the Season 8 episode where Homer encounters what he believes to be an alien in the woods near the plant, builds its entire narrative around this detail. The FBI is called in. Mulder and Scully appear. The town panics. And when the truth is finally revealed, the alien is Burns. Burns has been wandering through the woods in a post-treatment haze, his body so saturated with radiation that it produces visible light, his mind so affected by the weekly chemical cocktail that he stumbles through the dark in a euphoric, dissociated state. He literally glows in the dark. And Springfield's response to encountering a glowing figure in the forest was not to consider radiation, not to think about the plant, not to make any connection whatsoever between the facility that dominates their skyline and the luminous figure in the trees. Their conclusion was that it must be an alien. That is how completely the town has been conditioned not to make the obvious connection. The Simpsons movie takes everything we have been discussing and escalates it to a federal level. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency determines that the only viable solution is physical containment. The government builds a dome, a massive glass dome, and seals the entire town inside it. The justification is explicit. Springfield is classified as an environmental hazard. The contamination is so extensive, so deeply embedded in the town's soil and water and air, that the federal government concludes that the only way to prevent it from spreading to the rest of the country is to physically quarantine every person, every animal, every blade of grass inside a sealed enclosure. The United States government looked at Springfield and decided that the entire town needed to be treated the way you treat a biohazard. Think about what that means for the residents. Every person who was inside Springfield when the dome went up, every person who had been drinking that water and breathing that air and living in the shadow of those cooling towers for decades was sealed inside. The dome did not spare them. It sealed them in with the contamination that had been building in their bodies for years. And Burns sits above all of it. Burns, who has been managing his own radiation exposure for well over a century through weekly treatments. Burns, who has a pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental therapies. Burns, who understands the biological effects of radiation with the intimate, personal knowledge of a man whose life depends on correctly managing those effects every single week. Burns is not a passive beneficiary of Springfield's contamination. He is its architect. And Homer's continued employment, Homer's bizarre, inexplicable, career-long retention, despite being catastrophically unqualified and routinely dangerous, is not negligence. The evidence suggests it is strategy. When German investors briefly purchased the plant during one of the show's storylines, the first decision they made after taking ownership was to fire Homer, almost immediately, before anything else. Because anyone who looked at Homer Simpson and his performance record with clear eyes and no prior arrangement could arrive at only one conclusion: this man cannot do this job. The second thing the investors did was commission an assessment of the cost to bring the plant up to regulatory standards. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns at a significant loss, and Burns, of course, immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would look at 342 violations and start making phone calls. A competent safety inspector would document, report, escalate, and if necessary, go to the press. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a week of getting the full picture. Homer Simpson will never do any of that. Homer Simpson will fall asleep at his workstation, eat his donut, press the button he was told not to press, and go home to Marge and the kids without a single thought about what is leaking through those walls and into the river below. That is not an accident. That is a business decision. And the town surrounding the plant, the population that has been absorbing its output for decades, they are exactly as responsive as Burns needs them to be. Which is to say, not very responsive at all. Springfield is a town that watched a man eat a three-eyed fish on television and concluded that everything was probably fine. A town that saw a glowing figure in the woods and decided it was an alien. A town that was sealed under a government dome and, by the next narrative beat, had moved on entirely. The show has a word for this, though it never says it directly. Or rather, the theory does. The word is symptom. Springfield does not forget because its residents are lazy thinkers. Springfield does not fail to connect the dots because the dots are hard to find. Springfield forgets, resets, and continues, because whatever the plant has been putting into the water and the air and the food chain for 36 years has done something to the cognitive function of the people living there, has made the kind of sustained, critical, investigative thinking that would be required to identify the problem and demand accountability difficult, slow, hard to hold on to. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about Springfield. It explains all of them: the physical deformities, the impossible resilience, the collective forgetting, the inability to make obvious connections. the cheerful acceptance of things that should be alarming, the town that looks at three-eyed fish and shrugs. It all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible material into the same water supply, feeding the same population that cannot quite figure out why its children have 4 fingers and its fish have extra eyes. The plant is not background detail. The plant is the explanation. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment with where you are and what time it is there. It is always good to know who is out there in the quiet. And if you want more nights in Springfield, subscribing keeps them coming. Number. Section 2. Homer's Coma. The dream that never ended. Now we need to take everything we just established about Springfield, the radiation, the mutations, the impossible biology, the collective amnesia, and hold it in one hand. Because in the other hand, there is a theory that looks at all of those same facts and offers a completely different explanation. An explanation that is, depending on your perspective, either more comforting or more devastating than anything the radiation theory proposes. What if Springfield is not a contaminated town? What if Springfield is a dream? On April 1st, 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. The episode was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple and the title was, characteristically, self-aware. Bart plays a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer throughout the day, each one escalating beyond the last, until he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. The can is shaken until the pressure inside it reaches a level far beyond what the container was designed to hold. Bart puts it back in the refrigerator. Homer reaches for a beer. He opens it. The explosion sends him to the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed, recovering from injuries serious enough to require hospitalization, he notices a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets up, shakes the machine, and the machine tips forward and falls directly onto him. The weight crushes him. Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a clinically unconscious state that the show presents not as a cutaway gag, not as a dream sequence, but as a real medical event happening to a real character within the show's established world. Homer goes into a coma, a real one. The episode ends with Homer apparently waking up. Bart has been sitting at his bedside, and in a moment of genuine emotion, one of those flashes of real feeling that the show periodically delivers with devastating precision, Bart tearfully confesses that the whole thing was his fault. He did it. He is sorry. He was scared. He did not think it would go this far. Homer's eyes open. He is awake. He immediately starts strangling Bart. Everyone laughs. Everything goes back to normal. But before that ending, before the strangulation and the laughter, the episode reveals something that the family treats as a punchline and the show never revisits. Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% of his brain? Gone. Destroyed. The doctor delivers this information. Homer is told. And Homer's response is to laugh, which is immediately followed by Homer saying that he does not know why he is laughing. He has just been told that he has suffered permanent, irreversible neurological damage. He is laughing and he does not know why. And the family finds this charming. The episode ends. The series continues for 32 more years as if the coma never happened, as if Homer woke up whole, as if that 5% of his brain was a minor detail rather than a potentially significant piece of information about everything that follows. Unless he did not wake up, this is the Homer's coma theory. It is the most discussed, most debated, most internally consistent fan theory in the history of the show. Its basic premise is elegant and it is brutal. Homer did not wake up from his coma. What the show presents as a recovery is, within the theory, itself part of the dream. The waking moment is the dream's way of presenting itself as reality, and every single episode of the show that has aired since April 1993, every storyline, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every journey to space and every meeting with God, and every plot that stretches the boundaries of plausibility beyond anything that preceded it is the dream of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield, General, slowly losing brain function, while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence is extensive. More than that, it is structured in a way that rewards the kind of slow, patient, careful attention that the best storytelling always rewards. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. Not a realistic show. Exactly, it was always a cartoon, always prone to exaggeration, always operating in a register slightly elevated above documentary realism. But its subject matter was grounded. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers the possibility of infidelity and pulls back. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher who validates her intelligence in ways her family cannot. Bart faces the genuine possibility of being held back a grade, of failing, of having his academic record reflect the way his life has been going. The show's emotional core was built on recognizable domestic situations: financial stress, marital tension, the difficulty of raising children in a world that does not always cooperate with your best intentions. These were the stories that The Simpsons told in its earliest seasons. After the coma episode, everything changes. Homer goes to space. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer leads a neighborhood vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with a membership that includes some of the most powerful figures in the show's universe. Homer discovers that his mother is not dead. She is a fugitive political radical who has been hiding for 27 years. Homer meets God. Not once, twice. The show expands from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety and domestic drama into something else entirely. Something larger, stranger, more surreal. The main character has met multiple presidents. He has traveled to dozens of countries. He has held an almost impossible number of different jobs. He has survived things that would destroy an ordinary human body. He has become, in the years since April 1993, less a person and more a force of nature. Something that moves through the world, experiencing things and surviving them without any of the normal physical or cognitive consequences applying. This tonal shift has been debated for as long as the show has been running. The internet has spent decades arguing about when The Simpsons became less than it was. The coma theory proposes that the question itself is slightly wrong. The Simpsons did not get worse after a certain point. Homer's brain got worse. The show did not change. The dream changed, as dreams do, becoming more elaborate and more untethered and more responsive to the dreamer's internal landscape as the mind generating it continued to deteriorate. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere titled Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God. This is presented as a direct, face-to-face exchange, not a dream within the show, not a treehouse of horror fantasy, a canonical conversation between Homer Simpson and the divine. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something. God tells him that Homer will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God tells Homer that his time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline sits there. God told Homer that his waking life was drawing toward a significant moment. 6 months later, Homer lost consciousness and has not definitively regained it within the logic of the theory. The show presented this as a theological gag, a quirky bit of business in a premiere episode that was more interested in Homer deciding to skip church than in any genuine eschatological statement. But under the theory's lens, it reads differently. It reads as a quiet announcement. God was telling Homer, in the way that dreams tell you things sideways, symbolically, with the meaning visible only in retrospect, that the normal life was ending, that what came next would be something other than waking. The aging problem is the most significant piece of evidence the theory has to offer, and it is significant precisely because it is so simple. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. This is true of essentially all long-running animated shows, and the industry term for the narrative device that enables it is the floating timeline. The characters exist in a perpetual present that moves forward in real-world cultural terms, while keeping the characters frozen at their established ages. We will discuss the floating timeline in much more detail later. Every theory has an explanation for why Springfield's residents do not age, and some of those explanations are complicated, requiring significant engagement with the show's internal logic. The coma theory's explanation is the simplest one. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April of 1993. His children do not grow older because he was not there to see them grow. He cannot dream them into their teenage years because he was not conscious when those years happened. He cannot imagine Marge with gray hair because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly as she looks in every episode. His memory of his family is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. And in the dream, that is all he has. The last snapshot. The last real thing. The celebrity appearances that have become such a defining feature of the show's later seasons are also accounted for by the theory with remarkable elegance. In real life, a coma patient lying in a hospital room receives ambient input, They hear sounds, voices. The television, if one is in the room. The radio, conversations happening near the bed, nurses calling out names, family members talking to each other, reading the news aloud, playing music from their phones. The brain, even in a comatose state, receives this input, and some portion of it, exactly what portion is still a matter of significant medical debate, is processed and incorporated into whatever internal experience the patient is having. Under the theory, every celebrity who appears in Springfield is a name or a voice that Homer's brain absorbed through the fog of unconsciousness. A name spoken on the television in the hospital room. A voice on a radio playing down the hall. A fragment of a conversation that Homer's mind caught, held onto, and wove into the architecture of the dream. The celebrities are not visiting Springfield. They are visiting Homer's hospital room, and his sleeping brain is translating them into characters in the story it is telling itself. This explains something that has always been slightly puzzling about the show's later seasons. The escalating frequency of guest appearances. The increasingly prominent role that real-world figures play in storylines. In the early seasons, celebrity appearances were occasional and often integral to the plot. In later seasons, they became almost routine, a feature of every few episodes, a marker of the show's cultural reach, but also, for many viewers, a symptom of something slightly hollow. The coma theory offers a different reading. The increase in celebrity appearances is not a sign of the writers running out of ideas. It is a sign of Homer's brain, slowly losing its own material, increasingly reliant on ambient external input to populate the story. The dream is running low. It is filling its gaps with whatever it can hear through the walls. The show itself engaged with this theory in a way that was both an acknowledgement and a deflection. In its 34th season, a fake deleted scene was released. A scene reportedly leaked, later attributed to hackers, in which Homer wakes up from a long coma and reveals that every outlandish episode was just a dream. The show's writers had created this scene themselves. They animated it, they voiced it, they produced it with the full craft and attention of a real Simpsons scene. And then they presented it to the public as a hoax, as something planted by outside actors, as not a real Simpsons scene at all. But it existed. They made it. They thought carefully about what Homer waking up from the coma would look like, and they made a version of that moment, and they put it into the world, and they said it was fake. The executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory publicly in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. He moved on. But his dismissal did not address the aging freeze. It did not address the tonal shift that occurs exactly where the theory says it should occur. It did not explain the conversation with God 6 months before the coma. It did not explain why the show's internal logic, across 32 seasons of subsequent episodes, consistently matches the behavioral patterns of a dreaming mind rather than a coherent ongoing narrative. He said it was not true, and the fans did not stop thinking about it. Because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes the whole show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze. The reset button between episodes. The escalating implausibility of the plots. The celebrity parade. Homer's ability to survive anything and everything. All of it is explained by a single premise. Homer's body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him, because his mind is the one telling the story. There is an emotional dimension to the coma theory that distinguishes it from most fan theories about television shows. Most theories of this type, the kind that reframe an ongoing narrative as a dream or a delusion, work by making the show feel darker. By stripping away warmth and replacing it with tragedy, the coma theory does something more complicated than that. If Homer has been dreaming since April of 1993, then the dream he is having is not a nightmare. It is not a horror. It is not some punishment or some bleak reflection of a mind in crisis. It is, at its core, a love story. An unconscious man, lying in a hospital bed, generating 32 years of story about the people he loves. The story is not always coherent. It does not always follow the rules of cause and effect. It escalates into absurdity. Because dreams do that, they lose their grip on realistic probability as they extend. But the emotional center never changes. Homer wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous kid. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone. He wants Maggie to still be small enough that he can hold her in one arm. He wants to go home. He wants Evergreen Terrace. He wants the house and the couch and the television and the beer and the family all in the same room, all together, all real. And in the dream they are. Every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and the family is intact and everything is fine, that is not lazy writing. That is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally collapses, then Homer faces one of two outcomes. He wakes up in a hospital bed and discovers how much time has actually passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge is still there, whether anyone is still sitting beside him after all these years. Or he does not wake up at all. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. In the reading it offers, every episode becomes something else entirely, not a half hour of television, something more like a prayer. A man who cannot speak, who cannot reach his family, who cannot tell them that he loves them, telling them the only way he can, in the only language still available to him, the language of dreams. The eternal loop of Evergreen Terrace, where the children never grow up, and the love never fades, and the credits always roll, and everyone is always home. Number, Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Now we move into what is probably the most famous mystery in the history of American animated television. And we are going to spend real time with it, because the official answer, the answer the show committed to in 1995 and has technically maintained ever since is, when you look at it carefully, not nearly as settled as it appears. Before we get to who did it, let's establish what happened. Season 6 of The Simpsons ended with a two-part mystery that was, at the time, unlike anything an animated show had ever attempted. The show's creators designed a genuine whodunit narrative, structured around real clues and real red herrings, and promoted it as a national event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted. Fox treated it like a cultural moment. Viewers were invited to participate in a contest, submit your answer, and if you guessed correctly, you would be animated into an actual episode of the show. The setup was impeccable. Burns had, by the end of Part 1, wronged essentially every significant character in the show's universe. He had stolen an oil well discovered beneath Springfield Elementary, eliminating a major source of funding for the school's programs. He had shut down Moe's Tavern by financially destroying its owner. He had engineered the creation of a sinkhole that swallowed the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And then he had done something so excessive, so irreversibly wrong, that it unified the entire town against him in a way nothing had before. He blocked out the sun. Burns built a giant mechanical device, a disc, that could be deployed to cover the sun over Springfield, eliminating the natural light that the town's residents, farmers, and plant life depended on, and he used it. His stated purpose was to force every resident to buy their electricity from his plant around the clock, since without sunlight, no solar power, no daylight, no warmth that did not come through his monopoly. He intended to control not just the town's power supply, but the town's relationship with the sky itself. When Smithers, his eternally loyal assistant, protested when even the man who had devoted his entire professional existence to Burns's comfort and success drew a line and said this was too far, Burns fired him, on the spot, without hesitation. By the end of Part 1, the show had constructed an essentially perfect murder mystery engine. Every significant character had a specific, documented motive for wanting Burns dead or at least incapacitated. The show took care to establish each one. Homer, because Burns had worked alongside him for years and still could not remember his name, a slight that had accumulated into something approaching existential humiliation. Bart and Lisa, because the school had lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home had been destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he had lost his livelihood. Tito Puente, because the music program had been eliminated. Moe, because his bar had been financially ruined. Even Smithers, freshly fired, spiraling, with access to Burns's schedule and intimate knowledge of his habits and routines. The town gathered for a public meeting. Tensions were high. Multiple characters were visibly armed. Burns arrived. Confrontations occurred. And then Burns collapsed, shot by a single bullet, with his hands falling onto the town's sundial at a position that pointed to two letters, W and S, or, from Burns's perspective, looking upward from where he fell, M and S. America waited the entire summer of 1995 to find out who did it. Part 2 brought the investigation. Smithers confessed immediately, which should have resolved everything. But the confession fell apart when it became clear that he had been blackout drunk at the time, and had actually shot someone else entirely, a different Springfield resident, in a different location, with a different weapon. He had not shot Burns. He had shot old Jasper in his wooden leg, which was a different crime in a different part of town. Suspects were eliminated one by one. Principal Skinner had an alibi. Mo had an alibi. Tito Puente, in what remains one of the most memorable moments in the episode's history, performed a complete musical number explaining that he had channeled his rage into a samba and had therefore been otherwise occupied. The investigation eventually focused on Homer. An eyelash was found on Burns's suit. DNA analysis linked the eyelash to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. His motive was the strongest of any suspect. Years of being ignored by his own employer had pushed him to a visible breaking point across multiple preceding episodes. Homer was arrested and was on the verge of being convicted when Burns regained consciousness. Burns looked around the hospital room. He identified his shooter. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He had attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. Baby did it. The show moved on. Except the case was not actually closed. And the more carefully you examine what the show itself presents as evidence, the clearer it becomes that the official answer has significant problems. Start with the contest. Fox promoted the Who Shot Burns mystery with a national viewer participation contest. The prize was real and substantial. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Thousands upon thousands of entries were submitted, and according to the DVD commentary produced by the show's creators for this specific episode, not a single person selected from the sample of contest entries had guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person awarded the prize was chosen at random from the pool, and because that person did not have the right answer, they received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance. The show's creators could not give away the prize they had offered because nobody in the contest had gotten it right. The commentary also reveals that the writers were aware of one person who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest concluded and the producers attempted to locate them, the account had been deactivated. The one person who got it right had disappeared from the internet. The producers issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to come forward. As far as anyone publicly knows, they never did. This is an important set of facts. The show's creators designed a mystery, explicitly told the audience that it was solvable from the clues provided in Part 1, built a national promotional campaign around the audience's ability to deduce the answer, and then, when the answer was revealed, essentially the entire audience failed to identify it. This suggests one of several things. Either the clues were not as sufficient as the creators believed them to be, or the red herrings were so effectively constructed that they prevented the genuine evidence from being properly read. Or, and this is the most interesting possibility, the answer did not follow naturally from the evidence the way the show implied it did. The mystery was solvable in theory, but not in practice, because the answer was not actually embedded in the clues with the precision that a proper mystery requires. Now look at the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, or, from his perspective, M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson, M for Maggie, S for Simpson. It is the central piece of evidence. The image that appeared on every promotional poster, every fan theory discussion, every recap of the episode. But Burns himself stated, canonically and explicitly, that the positioning of his hands on the sundial was not intentional. He did not deliberately place his hands there to indicate his attacker's initials. He fell. His hands landed where they landed. The sundial clue, the most prominent, most discussed, most visually striking piece of evidence in the entire mystery, was described by the victim himself as coincidental. The show's central clue is, by the victim's own testimony, meaningless. Then there is the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. Shortly before the shooting, that holster is shown to be empty. The gun was missing from Burns's person before the attack occurred. This means the shooter did not bring their own weapon. They used Burns's gun. The gun reached the shooter through some chain of events that began with it being removed from Burns's holster, either taken from him directly or lost by him, and then found by whoever picked it up. Consider what this tells us about the shooter's profile. They were not someone who came to the town meeting armed. The people at that meeting who had the most consuming rage, the most premeditated grievance, The most deliberate intent, many of them were carrying weapons specifically because they had been thinking about confronting Burns. The shooter was someone who was not armed, someone who encountered Burns's gun by chance and used it in a moment of impulse or opportunity rather than arriving with the intent to shoot. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. But so does any number of other characters who were not carrying weapons that evening. Burns's last words before being shot were, according to the show's narrative, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He said, "Oh, it's you," in the tone of someone acknowledging a familiar presence. The way you might greet someone you know, someone you have interacted with before, someone who does not register as an immediate threat. Does Burns have a prior established relationship with Maggie Simpson? The show does not establish one. Burns famously cannot remember Homer's name, despite Homer working for him directly for years. The idea that Burns would recognize a baby, Homer's baby, a child he has no documented relationship with, and greet her with the casual recognition of, "Oh, it's you," requires a significant logical leap. But there are other characters in Springfield with whom Burns does have a prior established relationship. Characters who, if he saw them in a parking lot after the town meeting, he might greet with exactly that kind of unsurprised recognition. In Season 18, during a canonically set episode, not a Treehouse of Horror special, not a dream sequence, not a flashback, Homer claims that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it directly, out loud, on camera. And nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Nobody even seems to register that the statement has been made. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the most powerful man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line. Either Homer is lying, performing a kind of casual self-mythologizing that fits his character, or the official verdict was wrong. And if the official verdict was wrong, then someone else pulled that trigger. And the evidence that supposedly established Maggie's guilt, the DNA, the sundial, the testimony of a man who had just woken up from a gunshot wound after weeks of unconsciousness, was either incorrect, misinterpreted, or something more deliberate than either of those. The Marge theory deserves serious attention because it is supported by the emotional logic of the show in ways that hold up under scrutiny. Marge is a devoted mother. She watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, steal the town's sunlight, and systematically dismantle the community in which she was raising her family. Her motive is genuine. Her capacity for protective action, when the people she loves are threatened, is established across multiple episodes. Marge, when pushed far enough, does not simply absorb the impact, she acts. The theorist who constructed the Marge case also points to an episode in which Burns falls in love with Marge, an episode in which Burns develops a sincere infatuation with her that is not entirely played for comedy. And this is where the theory becomes genuinely compelling. If Burns was shot by Marge, if he opened his eyes in the parking lot and saw her standing there with his gun, the woman he had been infatuated with, the woman whose family he had been systematically destroying, then his choice not to name her becomes understandable. Even for a man as ruthless as Burns, there is a logic to protecting the person you love above all else. He woke up in the hospital. He was asked who did it, and instead of naming her, he looked at the sundial. He let the hands point somewhere else. He told a story that would close the case without putting Marge in front of a jury. And Maggie, a baby, too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, too young to ever face meaningful legal consequences, became the answer. Chief Wiggum said it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect solution. An accusation that closed the investigation, protected the real shooter, and carried no practical consequence for the person it named. The alternate endings are the most damning piece of evidence that the official answer is not as settled as the show presents it. The creators produced a complete alternate ending in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Full length, fully voiced, fully animated, a complete production that tells the story differently and tells it coherently. This ending was eventually shown to audiences in the context of a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, where it was dismissed as an ending that would not have made sense because the Simpson DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be downright nutty. That line is explicitly a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, a jury that ignored DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking at you. It is telling you, in the most direct terms available to a television comedy, that ignoring DNA evidence is something that happens, That the official answer being supported by forensic data does not make the official answer correct. That the people with the power to shape the narrative of an investigation can point the evidence in whatever direction they choose. The show is acknowledging, within its own text, that the mystery was never fully solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 4. Mr. Burns, the man who refused to die. How old is Mr. Burns? This sounds like a simple question. The kind of thing you could look up. The kind of thing the show, after 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes, should have settled into a clear and consistent answer about. But the truth is that the show has given different answers in different episodes across its entire run. And those answers, taken together, paint a picture that is less about a television character and more about a question the show is quietly asking about the nature of power and money and survival. The most conservative reading of the available evidence places Burns's birth in the late 1800s. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has spoken about events from the 1910s as though he experienced them firsthand. He served in World War II. His role, as established by the show, was morally complicated at best and actively treasonous at something approaching worst, involving a stolen trillion-dollar bill and a series of allegiances that shifted with the strategic wind. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He has described the Gilded Age not as a historical period he studied, but as a time he lived through, a cultural moment he participated in with full awareness. By the most conservative accounting, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the more expansive reading of the show's various continuity references, the number could approach 140. He is, by any measure, a man who should not exist. Not in the sense that he is fictional, obviously he is fictional, but in the sense that even within the show's universe, where the rules of biology are clearly somewhat negotiable, the lifespan Burns has apparently achieved represents something that requires explanation. And the show does explain it. Not completely, not in a single unified statement, but across multiple episodes, a picture assembles itself that is, when you look at the pieces together, deeply strange and deeply consistent. The explanation begins with the Springfield Files. We have discussed this episode already in the context of the radiation theory. It is the episode where Homer sees Burns in the woods and mistakes him for an alien. But the episode's actual revelation is worth dwelling on at length, because what it tells us about how Burns survives is more disturbing than the alien premise it replaces. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen. This regimen is described as so intensive, so chemically and radiologically extreme, that following each session his body emits a visible green glow. His skin produces light. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a state of euphoric disorientation, stumbling through the woods like something from a different kind of story. And the treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, he dies. Not eventually, not gradually within a week. His biological systems fail. The margin for error is 0. Burns is not surviving through natural biological processes. He is being kept alive by a recurring intervention that must be administered on a precise weekly schedule. His life is maintained the way you maintain a machine, through scheduled servicing, through controlled inputs, through the exact calibration of a system that has no tolerance for missing a maintenance window. And the treatment itself involves radiation. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's water supply for decades, the man whose factory has given the fish 3 eyes and the workers mysterious resilience, this man is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns does not just profit from radiation, he requires it. His body has been so fundamentally altered over so many decades of proximity to nuclear material that it cannot sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He needs external radiation input the way other humans need food and water. Take it away, and within 7 days, everything stops. This explains a famous scene, one of the most quoted scenes in the show's history, in a way that reframes it entirely. Burns visits a doctor. The doctor informs him that Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously, the doctor explains that Burns's diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium within his body, each one canceling out the others, each one blocking the progression of every other. The doctor uses the metaphor of 3 people trying to pass through a doorway at the same time. None of them can get through because they are all blocking each other. Burns's diseases are all trying to kill him at once, and because they are all present simultaneously, none of them can advance. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome. The scene is played for laughs. It is one of the show's most beloved comedic moments, and its comedic value is real and genuine. But if you accept the framework we have been building, the scene reads differently. Burns's diseases are not maintaining their equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. The treatments do not cure his diseases. They do not eliminate them. They manage them. They keep every illness in perfect stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance and overwhelming the others. The radiation is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent the whole system from going critical. Smithers's role in Burns's survival is not incidental. It is structural. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. Smithers ensures that the weekly appointments happen. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that borders on something beyond professional devotion. And the show has established, across dozens of episodes, that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, if he left, if he was fired, if something happened to him, Burns would be helpless in a way that goes far beyond the social or emotional. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns misses a dose. The equilibrium collapses. Every disease in his body surges forward simultaneously. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone, though the show has depicted their relationship as containing genuine affection on both sides. He is devoted because he understands, at a level that perhaps only he fully appreciates, that his absence is a death sentence. Not for himself, for Burns. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical competence and absolute reliability. And that knowledge, the knowledge that he is the single point of failure in a system designed to keep a man alive, is the true foundation of everything between them. Burns holds power over Smithers through employment and wealth and authority. Smithers holds a different kind of power over Burns. The quiet, non-negotiable power of the person who knows exactly where you will be at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning and will make sure you get there. Burns's relationship with historical events adds a texture to his character that the show has developed slowly and consistently across its run. His memories are not curated anecdotes. They are a continuous autobiographical record extending back further than any living person's should. He served in World War II. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during that war and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced the construction of infrastructure that now qualifies as historical. His family's wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, predates the founding of the United States in any meaningful legal or constitutional sense. The Burns dynasty, as the show establishes it, is one of the oldest continuously powerful families in American history. Not merely wealthy in the way that many families accumulate wealth across generations, structurally powerful in the way that shapes institutions, the kind of wealth that builds the systems other people have to live inside. Burns did not just inherit this legacy. He has been actively maintaining and extending it for well over a century. He did not take over a going concern and run it competently. He took over an already ancient empire and kept it relevant across the entire span of American modernization, from the Gilded Age, through the Progressive Era, through 2 world wars, through the post-war boom, through the Information Age. Always at the center, always in control, always the same Burns behind the desk and the same eyes watching the town below. The question the show never answers directly is whether Burns is unique, whether his survival represents a personal achievement, the result of specific knowledge and specific resources deployed by a specific individual, or whether it represents something that the Burns family has always done. If previous Burns patriarchs also lived far beyond normal human lifespans, they would have needed different methods. Before nuclear physics was understood, before radiation therapy was possible, before any of the technology that currently keeps Burns alive existed, what did they use? The show does not say. It establishes that the family has been in continuous control of its fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. It establishes that this kind of continuity is not consistent with normal generational succession, but it does not follow the thread all the way back. It leaves the question open, hovering at the edge of the show's willingness to commit. Burns has come close to dying many times. He was shot. He has been hospitalized across dozens of episodes. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been subjected to conditions that should have been immediately fatal for a man of his apparent physical frailty. He weighs almost nothing. His grip strength is effectively zero. His immune system is a theoretical construct that exists only in the ongoing negotiation between his diseases. By any normal biological assessment, he should have died decades ago. But he always comes back. Not through the passive resilience that Homer displays. Homer survives things because the show needs him to survive, and his body simply absorbs whatever is thrown at it without explanation. Burns survives because he has spent a century building a system designed to ensure his survival regardless of what happens to his physical form. Every dollar, every institution he controls, every politician he has funded, every doctor he has retained, it all serves a single underlying purpose. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the reactor running. Homer's survival is passive. It happens to him. Burns's survival is engineered. It is the result of deliberate, sustained, resource-intensive effort applied over an extraordinarily long period of time. Burns did not stumble into immortality. He bought it. He maintains it. He will not allow it to lapse. The scariest implication of Burns's immortality is not personal. It is structural. Springfield's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man, the machine, and the money feed each other in a cycle with no natural exit point. The town cannot remove Burns because the town cannot survive without the power plant. The plant cannot operate without Burns's ownership and financial support. Burns cannot die because dying would require the system he built to finally face what it has done to the people living inside it. He is too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on. Which, if his treatment schedule holds and Smithers is still answering, his calls will be for a very long time. Number, Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper, the day Springfield chose the lie. There is one episode in the history of The Simpsons that fans have been arguing about since it first aired. Not debating its quality exactly, though that debate has certainly happened. Arguing about what it means. About whether it is the moment the show lost its way, or the moment the show finally said something it had been building toward for years. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. It aired on September 28, 1997, and it has never stopped causing trouble. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner for 20 years of service to the school. It is the kind of community event that Springfield does well. Slightly disorganized, slightly chaotic, genuinely warm. And then a stranger walks in. A man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner. He says he is a decorated Vietnam War veteran. He says he was a prisoner of war, believed killed after his capture in Southeast Asia. He says he survived. He escaped. He came home. And he came home to find that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner for 20 years, the man who runs their school, who argues with Bart, who navigates a complicated relationship with his domineering mother Agnes, who has been a central figure in the community's daily life for 2 decades, is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He was, before the war, a street kid, a petty criminal from the wrong side of whatever track Springfield has. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian carried the guilt of a survivor. He traveled to Springfield to tell Agnes that her son was gone. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity or anything worth protecting, he went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the relationship with the mother, the life. He lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years. And then the real Skinner walked through the door. The town held a meeting. The truth was fully in the open. Everyone in Springfield knew that their principal was a fraud, that the man who had been running their school, attending their community events, navigating the politics of their neighborhood for 2 decades, had been operating under someone else's name and someone else's history. And then they voted, not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity. They voted on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict was unanimous. They chose to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issued a legal decree. The decree stated that Armin Tamzarian was officially and henceforth to be considered the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man whose identity had been stolen, the veteran who had survived a prison camp and come home to find his life occupied by someone else, was tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. Expelled, exiled, and the judge made it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again. Under penalty of torture, the decree said. Not imprisonment, torture. Let that settle. A community looked at definitive proof that their reality had been constructed on a lie. They had the living evidence standing in front of them. They had the actual person whose identity had been taken available for comparison, and they chose the fake. They sentenced the truth to exile and made the speaking of it a criminal act. Fans of the show reacted with fury. Harry Shearer, the actor who voices Skinner and also voices Burns, among other characters, publicly expressed his displeasure. Critics called the episode an act of self-destruction, an arbitrary dismantling of a character whose established history was one of the show's more consistent and interesting ongoing threads. The episode is ranked among the worst the series has produced. It has been cited repeatedly as evidence that the writers had stopped caring about their own continuity, that they had given up on internal logic in favor of cheap shock. But here is what nobody who offers that criticism seems to fully engage with. The episode is not incoherent. It is not arbitrary. It is not the show losing its grip on itself. It is the show saying, with complete clarity, something that it had been suggesting for years. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The mechanism had always been in place. The only thing different about the principal and the pauper is that this episode shows you the mechanism working in real time. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the literal expulsion of truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, resets after something that should have permanently changed everything, ignores a contradiction that cannot be ignored, it happens off-screen. The episode ends. The next episode begins. Everything is back to normal, and the show does not explain the transition. The audience accepts it because that is what you do with television. You do not question the reset. The principal and the pauper is the one time the show let you watch the reset happen in real time. It showed you the machinery. It showed you the vote that Springfield takes every week, invisibly, collectively, without ever putting it on the agenda. The vote to forget. The vote to maintain the agreed-upon version of events. The vote to treat the lie as truth and the truth as criminal. Think about how many times Springfield has experienced events that should have permanently changed the reality of the town. It has been destroyed and rebuilt. It has been invaded. It has been sealed under a glass dome by the federal government. It has survived nuclear near misses, environmental catastrophes of varying severity, encounters with the supernatural, and the literal blocking of the sun. And every single time, by the following episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. The slate is clean. The world is reset. This is usually called episodic storytelling. The format of the show requires it. It is technically true that the floating narrative structure of a long-running episodic comedy cannot maintain the weight of continuous consequence. The show would collapse under its own accumulated trauma if every disaster were remembered and carried forward. But the principal and the pauper offers something different from a production justification. It offers an in-universe explanation. Springfield resets because Springfield chooses to reset, collectively, deliberately, through a social contract that says, we do not acknowledge what happened. We maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We treat the lie as truth. And anyone who breaks this contract will be removed. This is not, it must be said, an exclusively fictional phenomenon. Small communities have a well-documented capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried, crimes get quietly resolved. Uncomfortable truths get rewritten through the patient accumulation of the official story, until the official story is the only story anyone remembers. The town that had that problem has become the town that worked through that difficult period. The person who did that thing is someone who has moved on and deserves privacy. The institution that caused that harm has taken steps to improve. Springfield is not doing something uniquely fictional when it votes to exile the truth. It is doing something deeply human, something that communities have always done, that the pressure of shared life makes almost inevitable when the truth is too destabilizing to accommodate. The real Seymour Skinner is the show's most explicit portrait of what happens to the messenger. He arrived with proof, not rumors, not speculation. The physical, undeniable, standing right there in the room proof that the community's understanding of its own principle was incorrect, and the community's response was not gratitude. It was not even a neutral, bureaucratic acknowledgement, followed by correction. The community tied him to a train and sent him away, and made it illegal for anyone to ever acknowledge what he had shown them. If the coma theory holds, this episode takes on an even more specific darkness. If everything since season 4 has been Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which an entire community votes unanimously to sustain a lie, in which a stolen identity becomes legally real through collective agreement, in which the fake version of a life can replace the real one without consequence. Homer needs to believe these things are possible. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained indefinitely, that the fabricated life can become indistinguishable from the real one if everyone agrees to treat it as such. Because that is what his coma is, a fabricated life, a dream pretending to be reality. And as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain its fiction, Homer never has to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most honest one. It is the only episode that shows you, in explicit procedural detail, how Springfield does what Springfield always does. It shows you the infrastructure of the town's collective denial, and it shows you, in the figure of the real Seymour Skinner, the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal, exactly what happens to anyone who insists on telling the truth when the truth is inconvenient. He gets tied to a train, he gets sent away, and everyone who stayed behind settles back into their comfortable, agreed-upon version of events and does not look at the window as the train pulls out of the station. Number section 6. Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She does not speak in any sustained or consistent way. She communicates through the sound of a pacifier, through the directional focus of enormous eyes, through gestures that carry more meaning than most adults manage with a full vocabulary. She has also shot a man, led a daycare rebellion, demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that exceed those of most adult characters in the show, and maintained a silence so complete and so consistent across 36 seasons that the only rational explanation for it is that the silence is itself a decision, not an inability, not a developmental delay, but a conscious, strategic choice made by a mind intelligent enough to recognize the advantages of not being noticed. Maggie Simpson is the quietest member of the Simpson family, and she is almost certainly the most dangerous person in Springfield. Let's start with the shooting, because it is the act most associated with her in the public memory, even though it is given everything else we know about her, actually the least surprising thing she has ever done. We have already examined the who shot Burns mystery in significant detail. We have looked at the problems with the official answer and the alternative theories that the evidence supports. But regardless of whether Maggie actually pulled the trigger herself or was used as a convenient explanation that closed a politically awkward investigation, the aftermath of the shooting tells us something important about how Springfield and the Simpson family relate to Maggie's capabilities. A baby was identified as the person who shot the richest man in town. The evidence was examined, the conclusion was reached, and the response from the legal system was essentially, yes, this happened, and there is nothing to be done about it. Chief Wiggum said it plainly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. And then the case was closed. But consider the final shot of the episode. After everyone has left, after the investigation is concluded, after the family has celebrated Homer's exoneration, after the credits should essentially be rolling, Maggie is alone in the room. She looks around carefully, deliberately. She checks to make sure that nobody is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that replicates pulling a trigger. This is a 1-year-old child performing a specific, contextually relevant action in private, after first confirming that no witnesses are present. Unpacking what that behavior requires cognitively, she must remember the act of shooting. She must understand that the act has significance, that it is not something to be performed publicly. She must have enough situational awareness to assess her environment and determine when she is unobserved. She must have the impulse control to wait for that private moment before allowing herself the gesture. This is not infant behavior. This is not the random motor activity of a developing child. This is the behavior of someone who understands exactly what they did and has decided that the optimal strategy going forward is to keep that understanding private. In 2012, a theatrical short film titled The Longest Daycare was released in cinemas, screened before Ice Age Continental Drift. It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. It is 7 minutes long, and it is, when viewed carefully, one of the most sustained demonstrations of Maggie's intelligence that the show's universe has produced. The premise? Maggie is dropped at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare run with authoritarian efficiency. She encounters a caterpillar on the verge of becoming a butterfly. Another child, an older, physically larger baby named Gerald, Maggie's recurring antagonist, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, evades the daycare staff, circumvents the facility's surveillance and security systems, and ultimately protects the butterfly long enough for it to emerge and escape. She accomplishes this without speaking a single word. She does it through observation, through multi-step planning, through improvisation when her plans encounter unexpected obstacles, through the ability to predict other people's behavior accurately enough to account for their actions before they take them. She reads the environment. She identifies threats and ranks them by urgency. She develops and revises strategies in real time. She executes a complex sequence of actions that require timing, spatial reasoning, and an understanding of cause and effect sophisticated enough to plan several steps ahead. And she does all of this while physically limited to the motor capabilities of a 1-year-old child. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. She falls. She stumbles. She crawls when she would prefer to run. But her decision-making does not fail. Every choice she makes is the correct one. Every move is optimized for the goal. She succeeds because her intelligence compensates for every limitation her physical development imposes on her. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly across several episodes. The results vary, as the show's internal consistency allows them to, but the pattern is unmistakable. In episodes where some measurement of Maggie's cognitive capability is made, the measurement consistently returns results that should be alarming, that should prompt serious conversation among the adults in her life, that should register as something extraordinary and in need of attention. The show presents these results as quick jokes and moves on, but the pattern they form across multiple episodes, across multiple seasons, is consistent. Maggie is not a normal baby, not even close, and the family does not notice. Or more precisely, they notice in the moment and then forget. They see something remarkable. They react to it briefly. And then the episode moves on and the family moves on with it, back to Homer's disasters and Bart's schemes and Lisa's campaigns, and Maggie goes back to the background. The baby in the corner, watching everything. This brings us to the theory's central argument. Maggie's silence is not developmental, it is strategic. Her first word was "Daddy," spoken in a cameo by Elizabeth Taylor, once, in a single episode, and never repeated in any meaningful, sustained way. She has spent 36 years surrounded by a family of extraordinarily verbal people. Homer, who narrates his entire inner life out loud, Marge, who worries and wonders in complete sentences, Bart, who provides a running commentary on everything that happens to him, Lisa, who lectures and debates and argues with the world around her, with the relentless precision of someone who believes that language is the primary tool of change. The Simpson household is never quiet. There is always someone talking. In the middle of all that noise, Maggie is silent, watching, processing, building a picture of the world around her that nobody suspects she is building. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family and in this town. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Her IQ is multiple standard deviations above the norm. She is, by any objective cognitive measure, the most intelligent member of the Simpson family and one of the most intelligent characters in Springfield. And her intelligence has bought her isolation, dismissal, the particular loneliness of being the smartest person in a room that resents you for it. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and faces punishment. Lisa tries to improve things and gets crushed by the combined weight of a community that has no interest in being improved. Her intelligence is visible, external, announced, and Springfield responds to visible intelligence in women by making sure the intelligence knows its place. Maggie has watched this happen. She has been watching it since she was old enough to observe the patterns of her family's life. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition, and receive, in return, just enough acknowledgement to keep her fighting without ever quite winning. She has watched the smartest person in the household be consistently overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed by people who should know better. And Maggie has drawn the opposite conclusion from the one Lisa reached. Lisa's conclusion is to keep fighting regardless of the cost, because the fight itself is meaningful even when it does not produce the intended result. Maggie's conclusion, if we accept the theory, is simpler and in some ways colder. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more freedom you have to act. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what is the result? The family does not notice. The community does not investigate. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on Homer, on Smithers, on virtually every adult in the vicinity before it settled almost reluctantly on the baby. Because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to detect an organizing structure. Every act of heroism, every demonstration of intelligence, every moment where Maggie's intervention changes a situation, it happens below the radar. In the spaces where adult attention does not reach. Maggie has ensured that nobody looks at those spaces by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She performs helplessness. She performs the passivity and dependence that everyone expects of an infant. She gives the adults in her life no reason to look more carefully. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. And she has spent 36 years ensuring that nobody figures that out. Connect this to the radiation theory, and Maggie becomes something even more interesting. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates mutations, and if those mutations manifest differently in different people based on factors we do not fully understand, then Maggie and Homer represent the two extreme ends of a spectrum. Homer's mutation diminished his cognitive function below clinical thresholds. Maggie's mutation elevated hers beyond the upper limits of standard measurement. Same environmental cause, same contaminated water, same irradiated air, same cracked cooling towers above the same neighborhood. But where the father's brain was degraded, the daughter's was amplified. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive event. And if the coma theory holds, Maggie's genius becomes the most emotionally resonant detail in the entire show. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind generating a story about the family it cannot reach, then Maggie's extraordinary intelligence is not a mutation. It is a father's hope. Homer cannot watch his youngest child grow up. He cannot be there for whatever she becomes. He cannot see who she is going to be when the world finally gets its full look at her. So, in the dream, he makes her capable of anything. He gives her an intelligence that no baby should possess. He makes her able to protect herself, to protect others, to navigate any situation with a cognitive sophistication far beyond what her age should allow. Because in the coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be okay without him. Her genius is his prayer. But back in the version of Springfield that exists outside the coma, in the reading where the show's events are happening to real characters in a real fictional world, the darkness of Maggie's silence is something else. She does not speak because speaking in Springfield is a calculated risk that she has assessed and found not worth taking. She does not reveal her intelligence because visible intelligence is punished in this town. She watches everything. She understands everything. She remembers everything. And she waits. For what? The show has never answered that question. It has gestured toward it in flash-forward episodes where adult Maggie appears as an architect, as a musician, as something fully realized and deeply capable. But in the continuous present of Springfield, where the timeline floats and nobody ages and the question of what comes next is perpetually deferred, Maggie remains exactly where she has always been. On the floor, on the couch, in the corner of every scene, watching, behind the pacifier, behind those enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is thinking, something is planning, something has been watching this family, and this town, and this world with an attention and an intelligence that nobody suspects, because Maggie has worked very carefully to make sure they do not. When she decides to act, when she finally breaks her silence and shows Springfield what she has been carrying behind that patient, blank expression, the town will not see it coming, because she has spent her entire visible life making sure it will not. Number Section 7. The predictions how a cartoon wrote the future. Let us talk about something that has made The Simpsons more famous in the 2020s than it was during the peak of its cultural dominance in the 1990s. Something that has sent the show's clips to the top of social media feeds on a regular basis, that has turned 30-year-old episodes into breaking news, that has generated the question sometimes asked in wonder, sometimes in genuine unease, of whether a cartoon that started airing in 1989 has been, in some meaningful sense, predicting the future. The answer to that question is more interesting than either yes or no would be. And the path to that answer tells us something important about how culture works, about how the show's relationship to American life has evolved over 3.5 decades. Start with the most discussed example. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. In that episode, Lisa's predecessor in the Oval Office, the person who left her with a country in the condition it is in when she takes office, is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the election of 2016. 16 years before America made the choice, the episode depicted as a joke about the direction celebrity and politics were heading. The internet responded to this alignment with a mixture of amazement and genuine bewilderment. Screenshots from the episode circulated widely. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted it" became a cultural meme, a template that could be applied to any subsequent coincidence between the show's archive and the current news cycle. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years were suddenly watching old episodes, searching through the catalog for other examples, treating a comedy writing staff's satirical output as something approaching a prophetic text. And the list of additional examples was genuinely extensive. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a device worn on the wrist that displayed information and enabled communication, something that would become recognizable as a smartwatch 2 decades later. In a 1998 episode, Homer discovers a mathematical equation that appears to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1993 episode depicted a flu virus originating in Asia, spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, panic buying, and a frantic search for a cure, an episode that aired 27 years before a real global pandemic with precisely those characteristics. In a 1996 episode, a joke was written about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. That collaboration actually happened in 2024, 28 years after the joke, when Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. In a 1998 episode, the show depicted Disney acquiring the Fox Corporation, which actually happened in 2019. The list continues. Video calling technology, autocorrect failures, surveillance culture, the specific visual language of certain political moments. The show has produced enough of these alignments that the pattern itself has become the story, and the story has taken on a life that extends well beyond the show's actual current audience. The people who actually make The Simpsons have been asked about this phenomenon, and their answers are consistent and notably unromantic. Al Jean, the show's longtime executive producer, has addressed it with a directness that cuts through the mystique the internet has built around it. His explanation, paraphrased, "If you throw enough darts, you will eventually hit some bullseyes." That is the substance of it. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, and satirical observations. When you generate that volume of content over that period of time, some of it will align with future events through sheer statistical probability. It is not prophecy, it is math. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, added a dimension to this explanation that is worth sitting with. He noted that most of the supposed predictions are not actually predictions at all. They are observations about trends that were already visible when the episodes were written. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly discussing the possibility of running for office since the late 1980s, that the merging of celebrity and politics had been a visible trajectory for years, and they wrote a joke about the logical endpoint of that trajectory. The joke was, what if this kept going? The answer, 16 years later, was, it did. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend in the entertainment industry and wrote a gag about what that trend looked like at its furthest extension. When the merger actually happened, it was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention to the industry. The show had simply articulated it as satire first. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been among the most formally educated in television. Multiple writers hold advanced degrees from institutions with strong mathematics, science, political theory, and literature programs. Several writers have backgrounds in fields, computer science, economics, physics that involve pattern recognition and trajectory analysis as core professional skills. These are not people making random guesses. They are highly educated observers of American culture who spend their careers studying the direction things are moving and then pushing that direction to its absurd but logical conclusion. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present with unusual care and then extending the line forward to see where it goes. But this explanation, true as it is and honest as it comes from the people who know best, does not account for everything, because some of the coincidences are specific in a way that goes beyond trend extrapolation. The Trump episode did not just forecast that a celebrity might run for president. It identified Trump by name. It showed him descending an escalator in a visual sequence that mirrors, with unsettling precision, the visual aesthetics of the actual announcement Trump made in 2015. The Siegfried and Roy episode, yes, there was one, did not just make a general observation about exotic animals being dangerous. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is what actually happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. These are not vague pattern extrapolations. They are specific details that align with specific future events in ways that make you pause. This is where the meta-theory becomes more interesting than the conspiracy version. The theory that The Simpsons predicts the future misunderstands the causality. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through prophecy, not through any mystical or conspiratorial mechanism, through cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most widely distributed, and deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the American cultural lexicon in a way that only the most deeply embedded cultural artifacts manage. Its observations about American life have influenced how Americans understand their own culture, their own politics, their own domestic experience. When The Simpsons makes a joke about something Trump's presidency, media consolidation, a specific kind of technology, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people encounter it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes part of the way people think about whatever the joke is about. The show does not predict the Trump presidency. The show makes the idea of the Trump presidency feel familiar. It primes the cultural imagination. It introduces the concept as a joke, as an absurdist extrapolation, and in doing so it makes the real version of that thing feel, when it eventually arrives, like something that was always coming, like an inevitable punchline to a joke that started decades ago. When the merger actually happened, when Trump actually won, when the specific things the show had joked about became actual events in the actual world, the cultural response was not shock, it was recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already told us this. The sense of déjà vu that accompanied these moments was not evidence of prophecy. It was evidence of cultural saturation. The show had prepared the audience to recognize these events as familiar, and when the events arrived, they were familiar. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield, not because a cartoon caused it. Because the cartoon and the country have been in a feedback loop for 36 years, each influencing the other's contours, the show holds up a mirror. The audience looks into the mirror, and gradually, imperceptibly, the face looking back becomes the face in the glass. The show's satire of nuclear power, of corrupt billionaires, of incompetent government, of populations too distracted and too cognitively overloaded to notice how thoroughly they are being exploited. This is not a prediction of where America was headed. It is a diagnosis of where America already was in 1989. The show wrote down what it saw, and the thing it saw has not substantially changed in 36 years. The prediction phenomenon is also, importantly, a product of confirmation bias. The show has produced thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks, jokes about moon colonies, jokes about political outcomes that went the other way, technological predictions that did not materialize, cultural shifts that the show anticipated but that history did not deliver. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds viral social media posts around The Simpsons' predictions that failed. Nobody is talking about the things the show got wrong. Confirmation bias works in one direction. We remember the hits. We forget the misses. And when you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations, and then filter those observations through a confirmation bias engine as powerful as the internet, designed to elevate content that produces strong emotional responses, particularly content that produces the particular emotional flavor of uncanny recognition, you end up with a highlight reel that looks very much like prophecy. It is not prophecy. It is a brilliant show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated observers of culture, filtered through the most powerful confirmation engine ever built, producing a curated archive of the moments when the satire aligned with reality. The predictions are not supernatural. They are not evidence of conspiracy. They are the natural result of volume, intelligence, and selection bias working together to produce something that feels, from certain angles and in certain lights, like something it is not. But here is the thing, and it is worth sitting with. Even knowing how the trick works, even understanding the mechanism completely, being able to name every component and explain every step when you watch a clip from 1997 that lines up perfectly with something that happened last week, the uncanny feeling does not entirely go away. The recognition is still there. The sense that the show saw something is still present, even after the intellectual explanation has done its work. Maybe that is the real mystery of the predictions. Not that they happened, but that they keep happening in ways that the explanation, however complete, does not fully account for emotionally. The show keeps reaching forward into time, and time keeps reaching back, and whatever is being exchanged in that transaction, whether it is prophecy or feedback or simply the slow accumulation of a culture that has stared at its own reflection long enough to start resembling what it sees it does. Not stop. 800 episodes, 36 years. And the show is still making observations about where America is going. Some of those observations will come true, and when they do, someone will make a video, and everyone will watch it, and everyone will feel that uncanny recognition, and nobody will quite be able to explain it, even knowing all the reasons why it is not what it feels like. Number Section 8. Mona Simpson, the mother burns erased. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was not a mystery. It was a fact, stated directly, backed up with evidence. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him. There was a grave. Homer had mourned. He had grown up knowing, in the way that becomes part of your structure, part of the architecture of who you are, that he was a boy whose mother had died when he was young. This knowledge shaped Homer in ways the show depicts consistently across its early seasons, without ever fully naming what it is doing. His desperate need to be loved. His clinginess toward Marge. His terror of abandonment, which manifests in ways that seem excessive until you understand what is underneath them. His willingness to absorb humiliation and contempt from his employer rather than risk losing the one stable structure in his adult life. His compulsive need to be liked by the people around him, even people who have given him no particular reason to like them in return. His tendency to attach with overwhelming intensity to any figure who offers him warmth, any replacement for something he has been carrying an absence of for his entire life. Homer Simpson's entire personality is a wound shaped like his mother, and in Season 7, the show revealed that the wound had been inflicted unnecessarily, that the loss it was responding to had been manufactured, that the grave Abe showed him did not belong to his mother. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired on November 19th, 1995. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes the show has ever produced, and the reputation is earned. It is genuinely, quietly devastating in ways that reward paying attention. Here is how the revelation unfolds. Homer, attempting to get out of working on a Saturday, fakes his own death. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant. The town believes he is dead. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the error, Homer discovers something in the municipal records that should not be there. According to the official files, his mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been directing Homer's grief at a famous writer's headstone for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He has grown, changed, become a person she has only been able to imagine from the distance of 27 years. But when the recognition finally comes, the scene that follows is one of the most emotionally honest the show has produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for more than 2 decades, meeting beside a stone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to. Because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man Homer would grow up to work for the man who signs his checks, the man who runs the plant visible from Homer's house, the man who cannot remember Homer's name despite years of direct employment, had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son. She was ordinary in the way that many extraordinary people appear ordinary before the circumstances that reveal them arrive. And then the world outside Springfield began to pull. The civil rights movement, the counterculture, Vietnam, and the protests against it. These were not abstract events happening in distant cities. They were reaching into every American community, asking people to decide where they stood. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, and the group targeted a specific facility, a biological weapons laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. Let that settle for a moment. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant. He owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory designed to produce biological weapons operating in Springfield, in the same community where Homer Simpson was growing up, where children were playing in backyards, and families were living their lives with no awareness that the richest man in town was manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in a lab not far from where they slept. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. The raid was successful. The germs were eliminated. And during the chaos of the escape, Mona made one mistake. She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the confusion. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. And Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving or tell him that the leaving had nothing to do with him. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping. And she disappeared. For 27 years. Homer woke up. His mother was gone. His father told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing that he was the kind of son a mother would rather leave than raise. That there was something in him that made people go. That he was, at some fundamental level, not worth staying for. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. The theory, and the show's own evidence, suggests he engineered Homer's. The version of Homer that exists in Springfield, the compliant, desperate for approval, incapable of sustained resistance employee who has worked in a dangerous facility for decades without meaningful complaint, is not an accident of birth or an unfortunate convergence of low intelligence and poor circumstances. He is, at least in significant part, the result of a deliberate deprivation. When Homer was 6 years old, his mother vanished. When Homer was 6 years old, the capacity to develop a secure sense of his own worth, to build the internal scaffolding that allows a person to push back when they are being mistreated, to believe that they deserve better than what they are given, that capacity was damaged. Not by the radiation, though the radiation did its share. By loss? By the specific engineered Burns-caused loss of the person who should have been there. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He sees her through a cab window. He calls the authorities. The FBI shows up at the Simpsons' house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time with full understanding of why she is leaving, this time knowing who caused it. He knows. He knows the man responsible is his employer. He knows the man whose name he has to remember to pick up his paycheck is the man who stole his mother when he was 6 years old. And Homer does not connect these facts in a way that produces action. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process, in any sustained or consequential way, the connection between the billionaire who destroyed his family and the billionaire who signs his checks. The show does not play this as comedy, it plays it as tragedy, because Homer is not capable of making this connection with the clarity and sustained attention that acting on it would require. His brain does not work that way. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive erosion that come with living in Springfield's contaminated environment, Homer is too damaged to understand the full architecture of his own suffering. He can feel it. He carries it in every aspect of his personality. but he cannot trace it back to its source and do something with that knowledge. And Burns has always understood this. Burns has always known that the man he broke at 6 years old would grow up to be exactly the employee he needed. Compliant, grateful for any scrap of recognition, terrified of being let go, incapable of the kind of sustained critical analysis that would allow him to see the system he is inside. The show confirms the depth of this arrangement through a later revelation. Burns committed a crime. Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would always have a job at the plant, no matter what he did, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many times his behavior should have resulted in termination, and the number is documented at 742, Homer would remain employed. His job was not a reward for performance. It was not kept as a result of some affection Burns had developed over years of working proximity. It was a contractual obligation, brokered in silence, between Homer's father and his mother's persecutor. Homer has never known about this deal. Nobody has told him. The deal has been maintained in secret because telling Homer would mean explaining why the deal was necessary. Explaining why the deal was necessary would mean explaining what Burns did to Mona. Explaining what Burns did to Mona would mean confronting the full scope of what one man's greed and cruelty has done to one family across 3 generations. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's decision to pursue Mona Simpson for destroying a biological weapons laboratory. Abe, who made a deal with the person who destroyed his family. Mona, who spent 27 years as a fugitive, cut off from her son. Homer, who grew up believing he was unloved, became cognitively impaired through the accumulation of environmental and physical damage, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother from him without ever fully understanding what he was doing or why it felt the way it felt. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's quietest and most painful moments. Homer sits beside her, he holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. The show does not play it for laughs. There is no cutaway. There is no reset at the end of the episode that makes it feel okay. There is a man and his mother, and the accumulated weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the comedy, underneath the gags and the couch jokes and Homer's falls, there is a story about what one man's power can do to a family when it chooses that family as the site of its expression. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe accommodated and lost his dignity. Homer inherited the consequences and has never fully understood why his life feels the way it does, why there is always this weight, this reaching, this need. Burns won. In Springfield, Burns always wins, because the man with the money writes the rules, and the rules were written around Homer Simpson long before Homer Simpson was old enough to read. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The town that doesn't exist. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. This is not an exaggeration. More people can name Springfield than can name the capital of the majority of the states in the actual country. It exists more fully in the American cultural imagination than most real places do. Its geography, its civic landmarks, its population and their relationships and their history, all of it is more present in popular consciousness than the corresponding details of most actual American communities. And yet nobody knows where it is. This is deliberate, and the deliberateness of it, once you examine it carefully, turns out to be one of the most sophisticated running jokes in the history of the show, a joke that is also, depending on your interpretive framework, something considerably darker. Start with what the show has established about Springfield's geography. The town has a nuclear power plant. It has a tire fire that has been burning for what appears to be decades. It has a harbor. It has a gorge. It has mountains within driving distance. It also has ocean access. It has desert nearby. It has farming country. It has forest. It borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, according to different episodes. It is located on the coast. It is also located in the heartland. It is near the Canadian border. It is also apparently near Mexico. Its weather includes blizzards and tropical heat waves, sometimes within the same narrative season. No single state in the actual United States contains all of these geographic features. No actual American town has oceanic access, mountain ranges, desert terrain, and active farmland all within driving distance. Springfield's geography is physically impossible. The town cannot exist where the show places it. because it is being placed simultaneously in multiple places that are hundreds or thousands of miles apart. The show has been generating this contradictory evidence for its entire run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow the possibilities, a reference to the state capital, an area code, an establishing shot that suggests a particular regional character, another clue appears in a different episode that makes the previous clue irrelevant. The show chases its tail on this question with what can only be described as cheerful relentlessness. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He admitted this in a 2012 interview. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America. There are Springfields in almost every state, and because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon, for approximately 48 hours following the publication of that interview, the mystery was technically solved. Springfield was in Oregon. Case closed. Except the show immediately continued contradicting this. Episodes produced after the interview placed Springfield in geographic contexts that are not compatible with Oregon. The writers did not treat Groening's admission as the end of the question. They kept generating contradictions, kept maintaining the ambiguity, kept the mystery alive, because the mystery was always the point. The surface-level explanation for Springfield's geographic impossibility is the one the show's creators have offered openly. Springfield is meant to be universal. It is every American town. It is designed to feel familiar to viewers regardless of where they actually live, to resonate with the broadest possible American audience, to be the town you grew up in no matter where that town actually was. This is true. It is the intentional design philosophy. And it works. Springfield does feel universal in the way that the best American satire manages to feel simultaneously specific and general. But the theories we have been developing offer different readings of the same impossibility. If the radiation theory is true, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the normal rules of biology have been suspended by decades of nuclear exposure, why should geography be exempt? The town's residents have 4 fingers. The fish have 3 eyes. The people survive injuries that should be fatal and fail to age over 36 years. If biology has been warped by the power plant's output, why should the physical landscape be any different? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and ocean because the contamination does not stop at biological systems. Maybe the radiation has affected the spatial logic of the region itself, compressing geographic features that should be separated by hundreds of miles into a single impossible area. Maybe the town exists in a space that is physically as distorted as its population biologically. If the coma theory is true, Springfield's geographic impossibility is the most natural thing about it. Dreams do not have accurate cartography. Dreams have emotional geography. They have impressions of places, feelings of spaces, the residue of things seen and experienced assembled into environments that feel coherent within the dream but would not survive scrutiny on a map. Homer's unconscious mind, building Springfield from whatever material it has available, does not have a precise geographic database. It has memories of driving through farmland. It has images of mountains from a vacation. It has the sound of ocean waves from a television commercial. It has the heat of a desert from a movie he watched half asleep. His dreaming brain assembled all of these into a single place, layering them without regard for physical distance, because dreams do not sort by distance, they sort by feeling. And all of these landscapes feel like America to Homer. So Springfield contains all of them. The principle and the Popper theory, the framework in which Springfield's resets and contradictions are the result of collective, deliberate denial, offers the most practically interesting reading of the geographic question. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring regulatory action against a nuclear power plant if the state it is located in keeps changing. You cannot establish consistent EPA oversight if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. You cannot hold a municipality accountable if the municipality refuses to have a fixed address. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is a legal shield. A town with no confirmed location has no confirmed regulatory authority. It exists in a permanent state of jurisdictional ambiguity that makes sustained external oversight practically impossible. And who benefits most from that ambiguity? The man who owns a plant with 342 violations. The man who has been running a facility that poisons the water supply and dumps radioactive waste on playgrounds. The man who would, under any normal regulatory environment, have been the subject of federal enforcement action decades ago. Burns does not need to actively maintain Springfield's geographic ambiguity. The town maintains it for him, because the alternative landing, having a fixed location. Existing within a defined and consistent regulatory jurisdiction would mean accountability. And accountability would mean someone showing up with a map and a badge and starting to ask the questions that Springfield has been carefully not asking for 36 years. There is an episode, the show's 12th season mockumentary Behind the Laughter, which offers something that is presented as a definitive answer. In the original broadcast of the episode, the Simpson family is described as coming from northern Kentucky. It is stated plainly, but in syndicated reruns of the same episode, the location was changed. The answer in the original version became a different answer in the rerun. The truth shifted depending on which version of the episode you were watching. The show gave you the answer and then changed the answer based on when you asked. Springfield is wherever Springfield needs to be. It is wherever the story requires it to be. And it is, simultaneously, wherever you need it to be, because the show has been careful across 36 seasons of deliberate contradiction to ensure that it could always be your town if you needed it to be. A town that belongs to everyone belongs to no one. And a town that belongs to no one cannot be investigated, cannot be shut down, cannot be held to account for the three-eyed fish in its river, or the skeletons in its power plant's basement, or the billionaire who owns both, and has been alive since before the automobile was invented. Springfield will never be located, not because the show cannot decide, because the show decided long ago that an unlocalizable town is more useful than an addressable one. The mystery is the protection. The impossibility is the point. Section 10. The floating timeline. Why no one ages. Let us return to the thing we have been orbiting throughout this entire conversation. The thing that every theory in this narrative eventually arrives at, from different directions, through different evidence, with different frameworks. The thing that is so obvious, so constant, so absolutely present in every episode the show has ever produced that it has become effectively invisible through sheer familiarity. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in whatever present the most recent episode depicts. Lisa was 8. She is still 8. Maggie was 1. She remains 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They are still in their mid-30s. The passage of 36 years in the real world has produced 0 years of aging in Springfield. The industry term for this is the floating timeline. The present of the show is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters exist in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were in 1995. The cultural references update. The technology updates. The things happening in the background of the world change to reflect the current moment. But the characters do not change. They are frozen at their ages, locked in a permanent present tense, living through decades of cultural evolution without adding a single year to their biological clocks. This is the standard approach for long-running animated shows. Virtually every animated series of comparable length operates on some version of this principle. And because it is so standard, so built into the format, most viewers accept it without question. It is simply how these shows work. You do not ask why Homer is still 39. You know why. It is a cartoon. That is how cartoons work. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created contradictions so massive and so internally incoherent that they have started to crack the foundation of the show's own reality in ways that cannot be entirely explained by production convention. The most visible problem is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their personal history was grounded in a specific era. They met in high school. They fell in love. The details of their courtship were set during the late 1970s and early 1980s. The music, the fashion, the cultural references of their youth were all specific to that period. This made sense for characters who were in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward decade by decade, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, then they did not meet in 1978. They met in approximately 2005, which means their high school years were not defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by MySpace and early YouTube. The show has depicted this shift directly. Flashback episodes have rewritten Homer and Marge's origin story at least 4 times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. Their courtship has been set in the era of hippies, then grunge, then a kind of early aughts aesthetic, then something that reads as millennial. The characters are the same in each version. The love story is the same. But the era keeps sliding forward, and with each slide, the previous version of their history becomes obsolete. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. Their history is a draft that gets rewritten every few years to maintain the illusion of a present that never moves. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a document under continuous revision. Every theory we have discussed in this conversation converges on this point. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April of 1993, and his mind can only generate the versions of his family that it knew at the moment of unconsciousness. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the population's biology has been mutated at the cellular level by decades of exposure to the plant's output, and whatever the mutation has done to their bodies has disrupted the normal processes of aging. The principle and the Popper theory says nobody ages because Springfield collectively refuses to acknowledge the passage of time, voting episode by episode to maintain the fiction of a perpetual present. Burns's immortality suggests that at least within the show's universe, the normal relationship between time and biological systems is already negotiable if one person can cheat time with sufficient resources. The question of whether time works normally for everyone else becomes genuinely open. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this multiple times, and it has done it with real commitment and real emotional intelligence. In the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward to a future where Lisa is 23 years old. She is engaged. She has become the person the show has always been suggesting she would become: brilliant, principled, somewhat lonely, searching for connection in a world that does not quite understand her. The episode proves conclusively that the writers know who these characters would be if time were allowed to work on them. They have thought about it, they have written it. The future exists, fully realized, in their imaginations, but it is locked behind a glass wall. The flash forward is a single episode, a glimpse. The door opens and then closes. Lisa returns to 8 years old. The permanent present resumes. The future is sealed away. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. And this refusal is not arbitrary or carelessly maintained. It is, in its own way, the show's most consistent and deliberate creative choice. The question worth asking is why? And the answer is not purely practical. It is not just about the economics of long-running television or the narrative convenience of the reset structure. The answer, when you look at it fully, is emotional. The Simpsons are the American family, not an American family, not a representation of certain American families. The American family, in the way that certain cultural artifacts achieve a representative status that transcends their specific content. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They are what the American middle class looks like when it looks at itself and laughs, and also when it looks at itself and cries, and also when it looks at itself and recognizes something it was not quite able to name before the show named it. And the American family, as the show has imagined it across 36 seasons, cannot be allowed to change. Not because the show is afraid of change, but because the version of the family the show presents, the specific, particular, loving and frustrated configuration of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie in that house on Evergreen Terrace, is the version the audience needs. Homer must be middle-aged and slightly stupid and trying. Marge must be patient and occasionally breaking. Bart must be rebellious and secretly more sensitive than he lets on. Lisa must be brilliant and idealistic, and slightly apart from everything. Maggie must be silent and watching. The moment Bart turns 11, something ends. Something that is not just a show. Something that is part of how a significant portion of the world has organized its relationship to the idea of family, of American life, of Sunday evening, of the version of itself that it can tolerate and even love. And so the show does not let him turn 11. It keeps him 10. It keeps them all exactly where they are. And the audience, which understands perfectly well that this is a production convention, cooperates fully with the fiction, because the alternative, acknowledging that The Simpsons would age if the show allowed them to, and confronting what that means, is more uncomfortable than accepting the floating timeline as a fact of the show's universe. We did this. The audience did this. We pressed pause in December of 1989, and we have never fully pressed play. We have kept these characters frozen in their specific configurations, not because the show required it in a purely mechanical sense, but because we needed them to stay. Because the family that never changes is the family that never leaves. Because the house on Evergreen Terrace is always there, always lit, always the same, and you can go back anytime, and nothing will have changed, and you will not have missed anything, and you will not have to grieve the version of it that existed before. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is a contract between the show and the audience, and the audience has never once asked to renegotiate. Every time we watch, every time we sit down on a Sunday and let the couch gag play and the theme song build, and the family scramble to their seats, we sign the contract again. We agree to keep the timeline floating. We agree to keep the family frozen. We agree to keep Springfield exactly where it has always been, which is nowhere specific and everywhere we need it to be. The loop is not their prison, it is ours. We built it. We live in it willingly. And every episode that airs every additional piece of the loop, every new Sunday night in Springfield, is both the thing itself and also a small, quiet renewal of the agreement. The family will stay. The time will float. The house will be there. Nobody has to say goodbye. Number section. 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and Springfield's Hidden Darkness. There are characters in Springfield who exist at the margins of the main storylines, who appear in the background and the periphery, who are easy to overlook because the show does not make them the center of attention. And some of those characters, when you look at them carefully, carry the heaviest things in the entire show. Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know him. You may not know his name, but you know what he looks like. Tiny, elderly, extraordinarily elderly, nearly blind, peering at the world through thick glasses that barely seem to help, moving slowly, cautiously, through a Springfield that does not seem to notice him unless it is in the process of damaging him. Hans Moleman is the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. This is not an exaggeration or an estimate. The show has killed Moleman dozens of times across its regular canonical episodes, not in Treehouse of Horror specials, not in dream sequences, not in explicitly non-canonical material. In regular episodes set in the ongoing narrative of Springfield's day-to-day life. He has been struck by cars, crushed by objects, buried alive, attacked by animals, struck by lightning, incinerated. He has walked into traffic and disappeared. He has fallen victim to an astonishing variety of fatal outcomes. And in the next episode, he is back. No explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that anything happened to him. He simply appears, as he always has, in the background or the periphery of a scene, moving slowly, ready for whatever Springfield is about to do to him next. Most people accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies. It is funny, next episode. But under the frameworks we have been working with, the pattern is deeply strange. If the radiation theory is true, Moleman represents the most extreme biological adaptation in all of Springfield. A man whose cellular structure has been so fundamentally altered by nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He is not surviving in the way Homer survives. Homer's body absorbs damage and heals, an accelerated and amplified version of normal recovery. Moleman actually dies. His biological functions cease entirely, and then they restart. Death in Springfield, for certain residents, may be a temporary condition rather than a permanent one. A biological reset triggered by whatever the power plant has done to their cellular structure at the deepest level. If the coma theory is true, Moleman is something more unsettling. He is a background process in Homer's dream. A filler character that Homer's unconscious mind does not care enough about to maintain with consistency. Moleman dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally allows minor characters to lapse their processes, simply stop, the way a phone's background apps stop when the battery runs low. And Moleman comes back because the dream needs him to populate the next scene. He is not a person in this reading. He is a prop. A piece of furniture that the dream breaks and then reassembles without any narrative attention to the break. If the collective denial theory holds, Moleman's deaths are simply another item on the list of things Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates, nobody calls for accountability, nobody asks how he keeps coming back. Springfield has normalized his death cycle the way it has normalized everything else that should be alarming. The same community that looked at a three-eyed fish and shrugged, the same community that saw a glowing figure in the forest and concluded, alien. And there is one detail about Moleman that should be much more discussed than it is. He has stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He appears to be somewhere between 80 and the outer limit of biological function. He moves like a man at the absolute edge of his body's capacity. He is nearly blind. He has the physical condition of someone who has accumulated 8 or 9 decades of wear. If he is 31, something has happened to him. Something that took a young man, a man who should be in the early middle of his life, and compressed decades of aging into a fraction of the normal time frame. Something that made him look 80 before he turned 40, and then, having aged him catastrophically, made him nearly indestructible. The radiation theory has an answer for this. The coma theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. The only framework that has no answer is the one that says it is a cartoon and none of it means anything. And that framework, as we have been establishing for hours now, is the one that requires the most deliberate effort to maintain. Now we need to talk about Ned Flanders. Because Ned is the character the show has quietly, methodically, across 36 seasons, destroyed more thoroughly than any other. And the darkness hiding behind his relentless positivity is one of the most genuinely disturbing subtexts in the entire series. On the surface, and the surface is all that most casual viewers engage with, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind, in a warm and genuine way that the show mostly plays as endearing rather than cloying. He is generous with his time, his resources, his attention. He is devoutly religious, with a faith that appears sincere rather than performative. He maintains his body with care and discipline. He manages his finances responsibly. He is present for his children in ways that Homer is rarely present for his. He is patient. He forgives things that most people would not forgive. He smiles. He uses expressions that should be irritating but somehow, in context, are not quite. By any objective assessment, Ned Flanders is a better person than Homer Simpson. He is a better father, a better neighbor, a better member of his community. He embodies many of the values that the show nominally celebrates: family, community, faith, hard work, kindness, more completely and more consistently than any other character in Springfield. And the show punishes him for it relentlessly. The death of his wife Maude is the event that defines Ned's trajectory in the series' later seasons. Maude Flanders was killed at the Springfield Speedway during a t-shirt cannon malfunction. The cannon misfired because Homer was dodging the t-shirts. Homer, out of pure self-interest, moved out of the way, and the shirts struck Maude instead. She was knocked from the bleachers. She died. Homer's selfishness, his instinctive prioritization of his own immediate comfort over the people around him, killed his neighbor's wife. And Ned forgave him. He forgave Homer, genuinely and completely, in the way that the show depicts as an expression of Ned's faith and character. He did not hold it against Homer in any ongoing way. He absorbed the loss, processed it through his faith, and continued to be the same neighbor, the same person, that he had always been. But there is an episode that complicates everything. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house, an event that the show presents as cosmically unfair, as a test of faith that seems designed to break a good man, the community of Springfield rallies to help him rebuild. And the house they build is so badly constructed, so sloppily assembled by well-meaning people who have no actual construction skills, that it collapses almost immediately. Ned, who has lost his house twice in the same week, who has watched his community's charity produce something worse than nothing, snaps. He has a breakdown. He screams. He says things he has been holding inside for decades. He tells his community one by one what they actually are, how they have actually treated him, what their kindness has actually cost him over the years. And then he is institutionalized. At the mental health facility, something is revealed about Ned that the show then deploys with remarkable consistency in subsequent episodes, even when it does not explicitly reference this reveal. Ned's kindness is not natural. It is not the spontaneous expression of a good character. It is the product of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was, as a small child, uncontrollable, violent, wild. His parents, being dedicated non-interventionists who believed that discipline was harmful, took him to a psychiatrist when he was in early childhood. The psychiatrist spent years systematically conditioning the aggression out of him, rewiring his behavioral responses at a foundational level, making the expression of anger impossible or nearly impossible, building a psychological structure around the child that kept everything dangerous contained. Ned's kindness is not who he is. It is a cage built around who he is. This reframes everything about him. His patience with Homer is not saintliness. It is pathology. His brain cannot produce the normal defensive response to mistreatment, cannot generate the anger that would allow him to protect himself, because the capacity for that response was conditioned out of him before he was old enough to choose. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the programmed output of a system that was designed to suppress rage regardless of the circumstances that provoke it. His faith, and here is where it becomes genuinely dark, reads. In light of this, as a coping mechanism for a man who needs an external explanatory framework to make sense of why he keeps suffering, despite doing everything right, he prays, he reads the scripture, he attends church every week, without fail, with genuine attention and genuine devotion. He talks to God, he listens for answers, and the show has established across multiple episodes that God talks to Homer. God has appeared to Homer in direct conversation twice. God has interacted with Homer, acknowledged him, spoken to him in terms that are recognizable and real. Homer, who sleeps through the sermons, who barely manages a coherent religious thought, who treats faith as a vending machine, Homer gets the divine conversation. Ned, who has given his entire life to that relationship, who has structured every decision around his faith, who has kept his congregation membership active through every loss and every punishment the show has visited on him. Ned gets silence. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who falls asleep in the pew gets divine dialogue. The devout man who has dedicated his existence to the relationship gets nothing back. This is not presented as a random cruelty. It is a thesis statement. The Simpsons is telling you something about the relationship between goodness and reward in Springfield, and that something is this. The system does not care about moral behavior. It does not track virtue and distribute outcomes accordingly. It cares about compliance. Burns cares about compliance. The power plant cares about compliance. The social contract Springfield maintains through collective denial cares about compliance. And Ned is the most compliant man in Springfield. He was made compliant before he was old enough to resist. His entire personality is the expression of a conditioning that was imposed on him in early childhood by parents who did not understand what they were doing to him. The result is a man who does everything right, consistently and without complaint, in a system that was never designed to reward rightness, and receives in return a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who causes him damage without consequence or understanding, and a God who distributes conversation to the less deserving. Homer does everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. Ned does everything right in a system that does not reward rightness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who does not, has never closed. Because in Springfield, the gap does not close. The system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Moleman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that does not break, and a town that does not acknowledge what it is doing to the people who live inside it. Number section 12. Everything connects the full picture. We have spent a long time in Springfield. We have walked through every neighborhood, examined every theory, turned over every piece of evidence the show has left in plain sight across 36 years of Sunday evenings. And now, before we leave, because you can always leave, Springfield will be there when you come back. It always is. It is worth stopping to look at the full picture. What all of this looks like when you step back and let it resolve into a single image. Every theory we have explored in this conversation is different. They use different evidence. They operate through different logic. They make different assumptions about what kind of story The Simpsons is and what it has been trying to say across 3.5 decades. The radiation theory is material and grounded, rooted in the show's own depicted physical reality. The coma theory is psychological and interior, rooted in the emotional life of a single character. The shooting mystery is procedural, a detective story operating within the show's narrative. Burns's immortality is economic and structural, a story about what unlimited wealth can accomplish when it is directed at a single goal. The principle and the pauper theory is sociological, a story about how communities maintain their preferred versions of reality. Maggie's genius is personal, a story about one child's choice about how to exist in a world that punishes visibility. The predictions theory is cultural, a story about the relationship between a show and the society it has been reflecting and shaping for 36 years. Every one of these theories is different, and every single one of them arrives at the same conclusion. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental, something structural. Something that goes deeper than production convention or cartoon logic or episodic narrative convenience, whether it is the radiation or the dream or the collective denial or the institutional corruption or the accumulated weight of existing for 36 years without being permitted to change, something has broken the normal rules of reality in this town. And the show has been telling you about it since the very first episode. Not through exposition, not through dramatic revelations, through accumulation, through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail until the pattern becomes unmistakable to anyone who is willing to look. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you every week, in the same yellow living room, with the same family, in the same cracked cooling tower shadow. It just assumes that you will do what Springfield does, accept the surface, normalize the strange, move on to the next episode without asking the questions that accumulate in the background of every scene. Some people have refused to do that. Some people looked at Springfield and said, "No, I am going to keep looking. I am going to follow the thread. I am going to connect the fish with the plant and the plant with Burns, and Burns with Homer's mother and Homer's mother, with the man Homer works for and the man Homer works for with everything Homer is." And what those people found when they followed the thread all the way to the end was a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more coherent than the one the show presents at face value. Homer's stupidity is not a character trait, it is a scar. A scar left by radiation, by loss, by the specific and engineered damage that one man's greed did to one family across 3 generations. Homer is what happens when you take a person who might have been capable of anything and surround him, from childhood, with everything designed to make him less. Maggie's silence is not developmental. It is the smartest thing anyone in the Simpson family has ever done. It is the conclusion of a person intelligent enough to observe what visibility costs in Springfield and decide that the power of invisibility is worth the price of being underestimated. Burns's immortality is not miraculous. It is the logical conclusion of unchecked wealth applied to a single problem. Keep the body running, maintain the treatments, ensure the system perpetuates itself. Burns is not cheating death. He is purchasing it off the schedule indefinitely, with resources that are self-replenishing because he never stops making more. Marge's patience is not passive. It is load-bearing. It is the foundation that keeps the whole fragile structure standing. It is the thing that every other element of the family leans against, and that most of the theories fail to account for, because Marge is easy to overlook when you are focused on Homer's brain damage and Burns's immortality and Maggie's hidden genius. But if you remove Marge's patience from the equation, the structure does not just wobble, it falls. Bart's rebellion is not laziness or mischief. It is the only sane response to a world that has stopped making sense. A world where the principal is not who he says he is, where the water is poison, where the billionaire next door runs the town, where his father goes to work every day for the man who destroyed his grandmother's life. Bart knows, on some level, that the system does not reward following its rules. He has watched that knowledge play out in the people around him his entire life. His rebellion is not a character flaw. It is a reasonable conclusion. And Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and alone and still asking questions, still demanding answers, still refusing the comfortable version of Springfield that everyone around her has accepted, still insisting that things could be different, that the system is not inevitable, that the radiation and the corruption and the collective amnesia are not just how things are, but things that were chosen and could be unchosen. Lisa is the least comfortable character in Springfield because she is the most awake. She is the person who cannot stop seeing the three-eyed fish for what it actually is. The greatest mystery of The Simpsons is not who shot Burns. It is not where Springfield is. It is not why Homer is still 39 years old, or how Burns is still alive, or what Maggie is waiting to do. The greatest mystery is this: why can we not let them go? Why, after 36 years, after the show has shifted and changed and been through every phase that a cultural institution can move through, golden age and controversial period and resurgence and renewed debate, why does the family on Evergreen Terrace still have the hold that it does? Why does the theme song still land the way it lands? Why does the couch gag still produce the particular feeling it produces every single time, regardless of how many hundreds of times you have experienced it? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Homer is your father, the version of your father who tries harder than he succeeds and loves more completely than he is able to show and is more afraid of losing you than he has ever said out loud. Maybe because Marge is your mother, the person whose patience is the thing that holds everything together, who absorbs more than anyone sees, who loves you through versions of yourself that are difficult to love. Maybe because Bart is who you wanted to be at 10 years old. Unafraid, irreverent, free in the way that being 10 and not yet knowing how the world works can make you briefly, beautifully free. Maybe because Lisa is who you suspected you were too aware, too feeling, too good at seeing the things that would be easier not to see. And Maggie is the part of you that is still waiting, still watching, still building the picture, still deciding when the moment is right. Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go because letting them go means acknowledging that the years have passed, that we are older, that the world has changed in the time since the couch gag first played, that the person who watched the premiere in December of 1989, whether you were there or whether you came to the show later, and the premiere is simply part of your cultural inheritance, is not the same person who is watching now. As long as The Simpsons is running, as long as the timeline is floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at the end of another day at the plant, we do not have to fully reckon with what 36 years means. We can go back, we can sit down, we can let the theme song play and the family run to the couch and the credits roll, and for 22 minutes everything will be exactly as it always was. The same house, the same family, the same love, chaotic and frustrating and indestructible, on the same street in the same impossible town. The loop is not their trap. It is the thing we built to contain our own grief about time. It is the amber we pressed the family into to keep them exactly as they were at the moment we needed them most. And every episode is both a continuation and a renewal of the agreement. We will keep watching. They will keep being exactly who they are. And the years will keep passing outside, while inside the couch gag, inside the floating timeline, inside the cracked and leaking and impossible and beloved town of Springfield, nothing will change. The theories exist because some people looked at the price of that agreement and asked whether it was worth it, what it costs to live inside a loop that never breaks, what it does to the people who are frozen inside it, who cannot age, who cannot move, who are held in permanent amber by the love of an audience that cannot say goodbye. Maybe it costs them nothing. Maybe they are made of light and sound and they do not feel the weight of the loop. Maybe the theories are projections, human anxieties dressed in Springfield's yellow skin. Or maybe, somewhere in a hospital bed in a town that does not appear on any map, a man is dreaming. And in the dream, his children are still young, and his wife still loves him, and the beer is still cold, and the house on Evergreen Terrace is lit from the inside with the particular warm light of home. And every Sunday night, the dream continues, because the dreamer will not let it end. Because ending means waking up, and waking up means finding out what was real and what was not. And the dream, the yellow, chaotic, impossible, loving dream is so much better than any version of waking that the man in the bed would rather keep sleeping. Keep dreaming, Homer. Springfield will be there when you open your eyes. It always is. Number section 13. The side characters Springfield's forgotten population. There is a tendency, when discussing The Simpsons in any depth, to focus almost entirely on the Simpson family and the handful of characters in their immediate orbit. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, Burns, Smithers, Flanders, Chief Wiggum, Moe, Lenny, and Carl, Principal Skinner. These are the characters who anchor the show's major storylines, the ones who generate the theories and the discussions and the fan analyses that have been accumulating since the early 1990s. But Springfield is a populated town. Its background is crowded with people who have lives and histories and relationships that the show gestures toward without ever fully illuminating. And some of those people, when you look at them carefully, carry within their brief screen presences some of the most interesting threads in the show's entire tapestry. Consider Apu Nahasapima Pedalon. For most of the show's run, Apu was the proprietor of the Quick E-Mart, the convenience store that functions as one of Springfield's central social gathering points. He holds a doctorate in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology. He immigrated to the United States, became the Quick E-Mart's operator, and has been working there for decades. His work schedule, as the show has depicted it at various points, extends to extraordinary lengths, shifts of impossible duration, maintained with a cheerfulness that only begins to crack under the most extreme circumstances. The doctorate detail is interesting, specifically because of the gap it implies. Here is a man with the highest academic credential available in his field, working in a convenience store, in a town that his academic training should have given him every tool to leave. Why is he still there? The show does not fully answer this. It gestures toward the complications of immigration, toward the particular kind of economic trap that can close around a person who made specific choices at specific moments that seemed reasonable at the time and then became defining. But underneath all of that, there is a simpler reading available within the radiation theory's framework. Apu has been in Springfield long enough. He breathes the same air. He drinks the same water. Whatever the plant does to the cognitive function of the people around it, that slow erosion of the capacity to look up from the immediate and ask the larger questions, Apu has been absorbing it the same as everyone else. The man who should have had every tool to build a different life in a different place is still behind the counter of the same convenience store, decades later, and the town around him has never quite noticed the gap between who he is and where he is. Barney Gumble is another character whose situation deserves more attention than the show typically gives it. Barney was, before alcohol became the organizing principle of his life, a person of genuine intellectual capability. His SAT scores, mentioned in one episode, were exceptional. He was accepted to a university. He and Homer met in high school, and the show has depicted their early friendship as one between two reasonably capable young men who happened to make some choices that narrowed their futures more than they might have imagined at the time. The early draft of the Burns shooting mystery, the version where Barney was considered as the shooter before Maggie was settled on, is relevant here. The writers considered Barney seriously enough to write him into the scenario. The reason they abandoned him was that they could not figure out what to do with his character after that. Sending him to prison would have required the show to maintain a consequence, which the floating timeline resists. But the fact that Barney was in the conversation at all suggests something about what the show understands his character to be capable of beneath the surface of the genial, harmless drunk that he presents to Springfield. There is an episode where Barney gets sober. He stops drinking. He becomes, with some effort and some support, a person who is managing his relationship with alcohol rather than being managed by it. And in that sobriety, the person who has always been underneath emerges briefly into daylight. He is capable, he is thoughtful. He is the kind of person who might have made something very different of his life if the drinking had not found him at the particular moment it found him, in the particular place it found him, which was Springfield. Then he falls off the wagon. And the episode ends with everything reset, with the understanding that Barney will remain who Springfield needs him to be, the town drunk, the harmless background figure, the cautionary tale that nobody in town actually learns from, because the radiation theory suggests they cannot quite sustain the lesson long enough for it to take hold. Nelson Muntz is the show's portrait of a certain kind of childhood. He is Bart's frenemy, the bully whose laugh, that particular syllabic combination, that precise expression of gleeful schadenfreude, has become one of the show's most recognizable cultural exports. Nelson lives in a degree of neglect that the show depicts with moments of genuine sadness between the comedy. His mother is mostly absent. His father has been gone for years, absent in the way that some fathers are absent, which is to say completely and without adequate explanation or farewell. Nelson takes care of himself in a way that children should not need to take care of themselves, and he has learned to perform the role of the tough kid, the bully, the person who laughs at other people's misfortune, because that performance keeps him from having to occupy the role he is actually in, which is a child who is essentially alone. The show gives Nelson moments, brief, carefully placed moments where the performance drops and you can see who is underneath it. He cries. He admits to feelings he would never publicly acknowledge. He shows care for people he pretends not to care about. The show could have done more with these moments and chose not to, which is itself a choice. The floating timeline does not allow Nelson's vulnerability to accumulate into character development. He returns, every episode, to the bully, to the laugh, to the performance that protects him. But within the radiation theory, Nelson's aggression and Nelson's neglect and Nelson's particular brand of damage are consistent with what the theory predicts. A child raised in Springfield, drinking Springfield's water, breathing Springfield's air, without the protective buffer of even a minimally stable home environment, this is what you get. The damage compounds. The capacity for sustained relationship is impaired. The only thing that works reliably is the performance, the role, the mask that keeps the world at a manageable distance. Milhouse Van Houten, Bart's best friend, and one of the show's most consistent portraits of a certain kind of anxious childhood. Milhouse is frightened of almost everything. He is sensitive in a world that punishes sensitivity. He is devoted to Bart with an intensity that Bart reciprocates imperfectly and inconsistently. His parents have a volatile relationship that has included at least one formal separation and numerous lesser crises. He wears glasses. He has the particular combination of physical and social awkwardness that makes childhood more difficult than it needs to be. He is, in the taxonomy of school social hierarchies, firmly in the category that Nelson exists to terrorize. And yet Milhouse is one of the most loyal characters in the entire show. His loyalty to Bart, which sometimes seems disproportionate to what Bart offers in return, is one of the show's more quietly moving ongoing threads. He stays. He keeps showing up. He absorbs the social cost of being Bart's friend in a school environment where Bart's reputation is a liability as often as it is an asset, and he does it not because he cannot do better, but because he genuinely, consistently chooses Bart. The radiation theory would predict that the chronic low-level damage of Springfield's environment would manifest differently in different people. In Milhouse, it may have produced the anxiety and the fear and the impaired social confidence. But it also seems to have left his capacity for loyalty and genuine affection largely intact. He is, in his own way, the most emotionally healthy child in the show's main cast, which says something specific and slightly alarming about the rest of them. Ralph Wiggum, the son of the chief of police, and the character who has become, perhaps more than any other, the show's mascot for a certain kind of innocent non sequitur. Ralph's statements delivered with perfect sincerity, in a voice that suggests a mind operating on a frequency that the rest of the world is not quite tuned to, have become legendary. He is the character who makes the observation that nobody else would make, not because nobody else thought of it, but because the social filtering that prevents most people from saying certain things out loud has not been installed in Ralph's processing. The question the show never quite asks about Ralph is whether his apparent disconnection from normal cognitive functioning is something he was born with or something that has been shaped by his environment. His father is incompetent in the specific way that Springfield's institutional figures tend to be, not evil, not malicious, just profoundly limited in his capacity to execute the functions his role requires. His home environment, while materially stable in ways that Nelson's is not, offers its own kind of developmental gap. And Springfield's water, Springfield's air, Springfield's cracked cooling tower proximity, all of these have been present for every year of Ralph's life. Is Ralph simply Ralph? Or is Ralph what Springfield makes of a child who might, in a different town with a different power plant and a different water table, have been something else entirely? The show does not say. It uses Ralph for comedy and occasionally for pathos, and it does not linger on the question of what he represents within the show's larger picture of what Springfield does to the people who grow up inside it. Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., one of the show's most consistently compelling recurring characters, and the person who represents something the rest of Springfield rarely does: genuine, sustained intellectual capability deployed in service of consistently destructive ends. Bob is brilliant. His cultural range is extraordinary. His ability to plan and execute complex schemes that have, at various points, nearly succeeded in genuinely catastrophic ways, is a standing refutation of the idea that Springfield's environment inevitably degrades everyone it touches. Bob has been in Springfield. Bob grew up adjacent to Springfield's cultural world. And Bob is, by any cognitive measure, one of the most capable people in the show's universe. But Bob's intelligence is almost exclusively devoted to a single sustained purpose: killing Bart Simpson. Across decades of episodes, across arrests and trials and imprisonments and escapes and elaborate plots, Bob's extraordinary mind has been channeled almost entirely into this one increasingly baroque vendetta. The intelligence is real. The application of it is, at minimum, disproportionate. The radiation theory's reading of Bob is interesting precisely because he seems to be an exception. But exceptions often illuminate the rule more clearly than the rule itself does. If the plant's output degrades cognitive function across the general population of Springfield, and Bob's cognitive function appears unimpaired, what does that tell us? Perhaps that Bob's time outside Springfield has been sufficient to maintain his faculties in ways that long-term residents cannot manage. Perhaps that certain constitutional factors provide partial protection. Perhaps that the particular form of the damage in Bob's case has been displaced from cognitive function into something else, into the obsessive fixation that has consumed everything else his intelligence might have been used for. The brilliance is intact, Everything else has narrowed to a point. Fat Tony and the Springfield mob represent a different facet of the town's landscape. Every American town of sufficient size has some version of organized crime operating within or adjacent to it. Springfield's version is presented comedically, but the underlying structure it depicts, the relationship between organized criminal enterprise and local government, the way that money moves between illegal enterprise and legitimate institutional frameworks, the specific mechanisms by which people in power protect people with money from the consequences of their actions, is not a parody of nothing. It reflects patterns that exist in real communities, patterns that the show's educated writing staff understood well enough to construct a satirical version of with genuine detail. The Simpson family's occasional interactions with Fat Tony and his associates are played for laughs. But within the radiation theory's broader framework, the mob is simply another layer of the same structure that Burns represents: power that operates outside the rules it nominally operates within, sustained by the community's inability or unwillingness to look too closely at the machinery underneath. Groundskeeper Willie deserves his own extended consideration. Willie is the school's maintenance staff, a Scottish immigrant of formidable physical capability and occasionally volcanic temperament, who has been maintaining Springfield Elementary's grounds and facilities across the show's entire run. He lives in a small shack on the school grounds. He appears to have no life outside his work. He is, by the show's own depiction, profoundly alone, a man who has made Springfield his world by necessity or by accumulation of circumstance, who has nowhere else that is more clearly his. Willie's physicality is one of the show's running visual jokes. His musculature, revealed in the recurring bit where he tears off his shirt in response to some perceived challenge or confrontation, is extraordinary in a way that is played for absurdity. But within the radiation theory, Willie's physical development in Springfield's environment is another data point. Whatever the contamination does to biological systems, it does not do it uniformly. Homer's body adapted toward resilience and away from cognitive function. Maggie's adapted toward extraordinary cognitive capability. Willie's physical development, whatever it looks like underneath the comedy, is another expression of the same basic phenomenon. Springfield's environment pushing its residents' biology in directions that differ from what normal human development produces. What the show does not address about Willie is lonelier. He is a person of considerable capability, practical intelligence, physical skill, the kind of problem-solving competence that running a large facility requires, who has spent his life in one of the most thankless institutional roles available, in a town that does not notice him except when he is needed, in a community that would not miss him in any personal way if he were gone tomorrow. The show uses him for comedy and for pathos in equal measure, and the pathos, when it appears, is real. Willie is one of Springfield's saddest residents. Not because terrible things have happened to him, though some have, but because he is a person who is more than his context would suggest, living in a context that has no interest in suggesting more. The secondary characters of Springfield are not fully realized in the way that the primary family is. They cannot be. The show does not have the narrative real estate to give everyone a complete interiority, but they are consistent. They hold together. Each one expresses something about what Springfield does to people, about the range of outcomes that the town's specific combination of industrial contamination and economic pressure and collective denial produces in the people who live inside it. Some are made smaller, some are made stranger, some are made harder, and some, like Milhouse with his loyalty, like Willie with his competence, like Barney with his briefly glimpsed alternate self, carry within them the evidence of what they might have been in a different place. They did not get to be in a different place. They got Springfield, and Springfield got them. Number, Section 14. The Treehouse of Horror. When Springfield tells the truth. Every Halloween, The Simpsons produces a special episode. The Treehouse of Horror specials are the show's annual permission slip to do things it cannot do during the regular season: to kill characters, to abandon the constraints of the floating timeline, to deploy genuinely dark imagery, to engage with horror and science fiction in ways that the show's usual tonal register would not accommodate. The specials are non-canonical, officially. Things that happen in them do not carry forward. The deaths are not real deaths. The horrors are not real horrors. It is the show playing in a space outside its own rules. Except the Treehouse specials have a habit of being more honest about Springfield than the regular episodes are. Consider what the specials have depicted across their run. Homer eaten alive. The entire family killed repeatedly and in graphic detail. Burns depicted as a vampire draining the town's blood, which is almost too obvious a metaphor to comment on. The plant causing mutations of a specifically horrifying kind. The town being invaded and destroyed and rebuilt. Characters who are monsters proving to be the same people they always were, just with the surface stripped away to reveal what was underneath. The specials are called non-canonical. But canonical is a slippery concept in a show where the timeline floats, where history is rewritten every few years to fit the current present, where a principal has been legally declared to be a person he is not, where a town collectively voted to criminalize truth. The Simpsons already operates in a relationship with its own continuity that is flexible, negotiable, and subject to revision. The Treehouse specials are simply the most explicit version of that flexibility, and some of what they depict has a persistent quality that the non-canonical label does not fully dismiss. Burns as a vampire is a joke, but it is also the show saying, yes, this is what he is. A man who sustains himself by draining the resources and the health and the futures of the people around him, who cannot be destroyed by conventional means, who has been alive for longer than the normal rules should allow, who operates in the dark, and who is protected from the light by the infrastructure of wealth and power he has built around himself. Burns as vampire is funny. Burns as vampire is also accurate. Homer as a monster in various specials. Homer has been depicted as Frankenstein's monster, as a creature animated by outside forces, as a being of extraordinary physical capability and severely limited agency. And these are, the radiation theory would argue, simply the cartoon version of what Homer already is in the canonical show. A body that should not survive what it survives. A mind that was altered at the cellular level by forces acting on it from outside. A person whose life has been shaped by the decisions of others in ways he cannot fully comprehend or resist. The Treehouse of Horror specials are the show in a confessional mood. They are what Springfield looks like when the collective denial lifts briefly, when the community agrees just for one night, just for one special episode, to let the things that are true be visible. Burns really is a kind of vampire. Homer really is a kind of monster. The town really is a kind of horror. And the laughter that greets these depictions is partly the laughter of recognition. There is a recurring structure to many of the specials that is worth noting. The Simpsons family encounters something terrifying. They attempt to deal with it using the tools available to them. They largely fail. The terrifying thing is not resolved so much as it is accommodated, incorporated into the fabric of Springfield's reality as another permanent feature of the landscape. The vampire Burns continues to exist in his castle. The aliens who invaded are still somewhere. The mutations produced by the plant are visible in the background. The specials do not clean up their messes because the regular show does not clean up its messes. The reset does not restore everything to a previous state. It simply moves the narrative forward to a point where the mess is no longer visible from the angle the camera is currently using. The horror remains. It just moves off screen, which is, of course, exactly what happens in the canonical episodes as well. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have also become increasingly interesting as cultural artifacts. The earlier specials drew directly from classic horror and science fiction source material Poe, Bradbury, Serling, King, the great tradition of American genre storytelling that the show's educated writing staff grew up with and respected. As the specials have continued across 36 years, they have begun to generate their own internal continuity, their own recurring images and references, their own tradition. They have become, in other words, exactly what the regular show has become, a self-referential archive of a specific cultural moment, speaking both to the audience of the present and to the accumulated audience of the past, drawing on its own history as source material, becoming increasingly dense with callbacks and layers of meaning that reward the attentive longtime viewer while remaining accessible to the casual new one. The specials are not separate from the show. They are the show with the lights turned up, the normal mode of existence pushed slightly further than it usually goes, the things that are always present made briefly more visible. When Bart is killed in a Treehouse special and comes back the next segment, he is doing what he always does in the canonical show, coming back, resetting, appearing again in the next episode as if nothing happened. The special just makes the mechanism visible instead of keeping it off screen. And when Burns floats through the night sky in his vampire form, cape spread, eyes red, surveying the town that he drains every day and every episode through, means that the regular show depicts as economic rather than supernatural. He is exactly as frightening as the show has always been willing to say he is. Just louder. just more clearly. That is what the Treehouse of Horror specials have always been. Permission to be clear. Permission to say, for 22 minutes, what the other 46 weeks of episodes have been saying in code. Number. Section 15. The geography of feeling what Springfield means emotionally. We have spent a great deal of time in this conversation examining Springfield through analytical frameworks, theories, evidence, the kind of close reading that treats a television show the way an investigator treats a crime scene looking for patterns in the evidence, constructing arguments from the available data, reaching conclusions that are supported by what the show itself has put on screen. But there is another way to understand Springfield, a way that is less analytical and more direct, a way that acknowledges what the theories are ultimately about, which is not the show's internal logic, or its narrative consistency, or even its cultural influence. What the theories are about, at their deepest level, is the relationship between an audience and a story. The question of why this particular story, this particular family, in this particular impossible town, has held the attention and the affection of hundreds of millions of people across 36 years. The theories are all, at some level, attempts to answer that question, to explain the hold that Springfield has, to account for why the show keeps mattering to people who are fully aware of its limitations, who can articulate every way in which it has changed and declined and repeated itself, who know perfectly well that it is a cartoon about a yellow family in a town that does not exist, and who watch it anyway, who come back anyway, who feel something when the theme song plays that is difficult to name but is unambiguously real. Springfield is a feeling before it is a place. This is why the geographic impossibility does not feel like a problem to most viewers. You do not experience Springfield as a location. You experience it as a state, a particular quality of attention and effect that the show produces that has been associated with the show since the first time you encountered it. The yellow light, the particular sound design, the way the animation moves, which has its own rhythmic quality that is unmistakably the show even without sound, the specific timbre of the vocal performances, the voices that have become so embedded in cultural memory that many people hear them in their heads when they read dialogue on the page. Springfield is a sensory signature. It is what certain Sunday evenings feel like. It is what it feels like to be slightly tired but not ready to sleep, to want to be somewhere familiar without going anywhere, to need the company of characters who will not ask anything of you and will not leave. It is what it feels like to be 8 years old watching something you are not quite sure you fully understand, but that makes you feel like the world is larger and stranger and more interesting than the version you have been given so far. And it is what it feels like to be 40 years old watching the same show you watched at 8 and finding something different in it, something underneath the comedy that you did not have the vocabulary for at 8, but that you recognize now. The weight of Homer's love for his family, which is real and consistent even when everything else about him is chaotic. The particular loneliness of Lisa's intelligence, which is not the loneliness of someone who wants to be alone, but of someone who cannot find the level of engagement she needs in the places she is. The quiet heroism of Marge's patience, which is not passivity but a form of strength that the show has never quite adequately celebrated. The genuine fear underneath Bart's rebellion, the fear of the kid who has learned that the world does not reward vulnerability, who has decided that the best available response to that knowledge is to be loud and irreverent and refuse to care. These are not cartoon characters. They are the emotional shapes of people you have known, of yourself, possibly, in different configurations and at different times. The show has been running long enough, has been embedded in the culture deeply enough, that Springfield's residents have become part of the shared emotional vocabulary of anyone who grew up watching them. You know what it feels like to be Homer on a bad day. You know what it feels like to be Lisa when nobody is listening. You know what it feels like to be Bart in the moment before a decision that is going to have consequences, when you still have the freedom to choose and the awareness that you are probably going to make the wrong one. This is why the theories matter, not because they unlock some secret truth about the show's production or the writer's intentions, but because they are attempts to honor the seriousness of what the show has accomplished, to say, this meant something, to say, we paid attention, to say, we noticed all of it, the three-eyed fish and the coma and the shooting and the immortal billionaire and the baby who is watching everything and waiting, and we did not just let it wash over us. We stayed. We looked. We tried to understand. The theories are love letters to Springfield, slightly paranoid, densely argued, footnoted with episode references and aired dates, but love letters all the same. And Springfield receives them the way Springfield receives everything, with the particular equanimity of a town that has seen a great deal, that has been through a great deal, that has processed its experiences through the particular mechanism of collective agreement and continued forward, not unchanged exactly, but continuous. Still there, still lit, still the same family on the same couch in the same impossible town. The emotional truth of Springfield is this. It is a place where you can go when you do not know where else to go. It is always open. It never asks how long you have been away. It never comments on how much has changed since you were last there, because nothing has changed since you were last there, because that is the agreement. The floating timeline is not just a narrative device, it is an emotional promise. Come back anytime. We will be exactly where you left us. The kids will still be young, the beer will still be cold, the couch will be waiting. This is the thing that no theory fully captures. The comfort. The particular quality of comfort that the show provides, that it has been providing for 36 years, that it will presumably continue to provide for as long as it runs. The comfort of a familiar world populated by familiar people who love each other imperfectly and try their best and fail regularly and get back up and try again. Every Sunday, every episode, every season, without end. You can know everything we have discussed in this conversation. You can know about the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and the geographic impossibility and the collective denial. You can hold all of that knowledge simultaneously, and when the theme song plays, you will still feel it. The knowing and the feeling coexist. The analysis and the love coexist. The darkness and the comfort coexist. Because Springfield has always contained all of these things at once, has always been simultaneously a portrait of everything wrong with America and a warm light in the window of the house you grew up in. That is the final mystery. And the answer is that there is no mystery. The show is exactly what it looks like. A family that loves each other, in a town that is slowly poisoning them, on a street where the nicest man never gets rewarded and the richest man never faces consequences, with a baby who is the most dangerous person in every room, and a dreaming father who will not let the story end. It is us. It has always been us. Springfield is the mirror we built of America, and then could not stop looking into. And after 36 years of looking, we have started to resemble what we see. We always do. Number, Section 16. The writers, the people behind the curtain. It is easy, when a show runs for 36 years, to treat it as a monolithic thing. A single artistic entity with a consistent vision and a unified voice. The Simpsons. As though the show that premiered in December of 1989 is the same show that aired last week, in the sense of being produced by the same people with the same intentions and the same shared understanding of what the show is trying to do. It is not. The Simpsons has been made by dozens of different writers across its run. The showrunner position has changed hands multiple times. The creative philosophy has shifted with each transition. The show that Al Jean runs now is not the show that Mike Reiss ran, or that David Merkin ran, or that Mike Scully ran. Each era brought different priorities, different sensibilities, different understandings of what the show's core was and how to serve it. This is worth understanding because many of the theories we have discussed depend implicitly on the idea that the show has a single coherent authorial intention, that the radiation theory is something the writers planned from the beginning, that the coma theory's evidence was deliberately planted, that the mysteries we have identified are mysteries that the show created knowingly, with full awareness of what it was doing. The truth is more interesting and more complicated. The show has been made by many people over many years, and the consistency of the patterns we have discussed is not the result of a single unified plan. It is the result of what happens when a large number of intelligent, well-educated people spend their careers working within the same creative framework. The patterns emerge, not because they were designed from the top down, but because they are true, because they reflect things about the subject matter, about American life, about the Simpson family, that consistently reveal themselves to observant writers, regardless of which specific person is holding the pen in a given week. The Blinky episode did not need to be written by the same person who wrote the Burns' medical regimen episode in order for those two episodes to reinforce each other's implications about what the plant is doing to Springfield. They reinforce each other because they are both responding to the same underlying truth that the show's premise makes available. A nuclear power plant in a town, with inadequate safety, run by a corrupt billionaire who has captured every local institution that might otherwise provide oversight. This is a situation that has a specific range of consequences. Different writers, approaching that situation from different creative angles in different seasons, will consistently find the same consequences, because the consequences follow from the premise. This is actually a stronger form of evidence than intentional design would be. If the radiation theory's evidence were all planted deliberately by a single author, you could dismiss it by pointing to the non-canonical nature of certain episodes, or the floating timeline's indifference to continuity. But the evidence is not planted. It accumulates. It accretes across the work of dozens of writers across 3.5 decades, none of whom were necessarily thinking about the overall picture, all of whom were thinking about the specific story of a specific episode and finding, independently, the same truths. The coma theory's tonal shift observation works the same way. The writers who took the show in more surreal and more plot-driven directions after season 4 were not thinking about the coma. They were thinking about how to keep a show interesting in its 5th year, its 6th year, its 10th year. They were thinking about what Homer could do that he had not already done, what situations could be generated to produce comedy, what escalations of the show's premise could keep a long-running series from feeling repetitive. The tonal shift is real, but it is the result of the ordinary pressures of making television for a long time, not a coordinated narrative decision. And yet the coma theory uses that tonal shift as evidence. And correctly so, because the patterns we find in art are not always the patterns the artists intended. The unconscious does its work. The structure of the premise does its work. The accumulated weight of decisions made over years does its work. And the observer, looking at all of it from the outside, sometimes sees things the creators were not consciously putting there but that were nonetheless put there by the logic of the material itself. The great writers who passed through the show, Sam Simon, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, Conan O'Brien, David Silverman, and dozens more each brought something specific and irreplaceable to the archive. Swartzwelder's episodes have a particular quality of absurdist internal logic that rewards close reading. Vitti's episodes tend toward emotional precision that lands harder than it appears to be aiming. O'Brien's contributions have a specific comedic sensibility that is visible even without attribution. And the writers who came later, who inherited the framework that these early contributors built, have been working in the shadow of that foundation, while trying to find their own relationship to it. The show is a collaboration across time. It is the artistic output not just of the people currently working on it, but of everyone who has ever worked on it. Because the archive they built is the show's living body. Every episode references every previous episode, intentionally or not, because they are all part of the same organism. The organism changes. The writers who give it direction change, but the accumulated mass of what it has been all 36 seasons, all 788 episodes, that mass does not change. It is always there. It is what the theories reach into when they pull out their evidence. The writers who work on The Simpsons today inherited something extraordinary, the longest-running archive of American satirical observation in television history. And they also inherited a set of constraints that are themselves a product of that archive. You cannot change the characters. You cannot age them. You cannot let the consequences accumulate. You cannot resolve the mysteries because the mysteries are the show. The unanswered questions are part of what makes people keep watching. This is the paradox at the heart of the show's continued existence. The things that make it great, the consistency of the characters, the stability of the world, the promise of the floating timeline are the same things that prevent it from becoming something new. The show cannot grow because growth would break the promise. It cannot resolve because resolution would end the conversation. It cannot let Maggie speak because if Maggie speaks, something changes. And Springfield does not change. Springfield cannot change. Springfield voted against change, legally, with a judge's decree and expelled the truth on a railroad car heading out of town. The writers know all of this. They have always known. They write within the constraints, and they push against them gently, in ways that allow the show to feel alive and responsive to the present moment, while the fundamental structure remains frozen. It is a remarkable creative challenge, and across 36 years, across the work of dozens of people who have each brought their own intelligence and their own sensibility and their own understanding of what the show is, the show has managed it. Imperfectly, with growing difficulty, with seasons that are better and seasons that are worse, with episodes that reach the level of the best the show has ever done and episodes that remind you of the gap between what the show was and what it is now. But it manages it. The family is still there. The house is still lit. The couch is still waiting. That is the achievement. And it is, in its own improbable way, as extraordinary as anything the theories have identified. Number. Closing thoughts. The town that never ends. And so we find ourselves at the edge of Springfield. We have walked through every theory, examined every piece of evidence, sat with every mystery. We have spent time with Homer in his coma, and with Maggie in her silence, and with Burns in his weekly treatments, and with Ned in his programmed patience, and with the real Seymour Skinner tied to a train, disappearing toward a horizon the show never follows him to. We have found, as the theories always find when you follow them far enough, that they all say the same thing in different languages. Something is wrong in Springfield, something fundamental, something that was always there, in the architecture of the show, in the cracked cooling tower above the yellow town, in the three-eyed fish swimming in the river nobody thinks to test. Something that the show has been pointing at for 36 years, episode after episode, Sunday after Sunday, without ever quite saying it out loud. And something else. Something that the theories, with their analytical frameworks and their canonical evidence, sometimes fail to fully account for. Something that sits alongside the darkness and the corruption and the contamination and the collective denial. Something that is also there, in the same cracked and leaking and impossible town. Love. Homer's love for his family, which is the most consistent thing about him, which survives every disaster, every reset, every meltdown warning and donut in reactor core incident and fall off a cliff, which is there in every episode, expressed imperfectly, expressed sometimes through strangulation, expressed sometimes through decisions that seem to prioritize his own immediate comfort over everything else but present, always present, the thing underneath all the comedy and all the chaos. The thing that, if the coma theory is right, is generating the whole dream. The thing that Homer's unconscious mind is working so hard to protect that it has been running a continuous simulation for 32 years just to keep it alive. Marge's love for Homer, which is the most patient thing in all of fiction, which has absorbed more than it should have to absorb and has remained somehow genuinely felt rather than merely performed. The show does not always honor this adequately, but the love is real within the world it depicts, and it matters. And it has always mattered more than any theory about radiation or comas or immortal billionaires. The love between Bart and Lisa, which the show depicts as the particular love of siblings who are very different from each other and who would never have chosen each other if they had been given a choice and who are, nonetheless, each other's most important relationship. The episodes where Bart and Lisa genuinely connect, where the distance between the class clown and the overachieving idealist briefly collapses, and they are simply two kids who love each other, are some of the show's finest moments. Springfield is a story about love operating in a hostile environment, about the family that persists, about the connection that sustains itself through everything that should break it, through contamination and corruption and 36 years of reset and restart, and the same disasters happening to the same people who should have learned by now but cannot quite learn, because the plant is in the water and the water is in them and the learning does not stick the way it should. But the love sticks. The love always sticks. That is the final theory, the one that the others circle around without quite a consummate it. Springfield exists because love persists in it. The dream continues because the dreamer loves his family too much to let it end. The show continues because the audience loves this family too much to let them go. The loop holds because the people inside it and the people watching it are holding it together from both sides, each sustained by something the other provides, each unwilling to be the first to stop. The town that never ends, the family that never changes, the love that never stops. Find a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you want to. Springfield will be here. It is always here. The lights on Evergreen Terrace never go out. The television in the living room always has something on. And somewhere in a hospital bed in a town that does not appear on any map, a man is dreaming of his family, and the dream is warm, and the dream is home, and the dream is still going. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. Number section 17. The sound of Springfield music, memory, and meaning. There is something the theories never quite address, something that lives outside the visual and narrative frame of the show and yet shapes the experience of Springfield as profoundly as anything we have discussed. The music, the sound design, the particular acoustic texture of the world that Danny Elfman and Alf Clausen built around the Simpson family, and that has become so embedded in the cultural memory of anyone who has watched the show that it functions less like a soundtrack and more like a kind of atmospheric pressure, something you feel before you consciously register it. The theme song is the most obvious place to start. Elfman wrote it quickly, by his own account, a sketch that became a fixture, a piece of musical shorthand that communicates an entire emotional and tonal universe in under a minute. The theme is not a simple thing, despite its apparent simplicity. It has a nervous energy underneath the playfulness, a quality of things moving very fast in directions that are slightly unpredictable. The brass has a brightness that is not quite warmth. The strings carry something that is not quite anxiety but is close to it. The whole thing moves with the particular kinetic quality of a family running, which is, of course, exactly what it accompanies in the opening sequence. The couch gag, which varies every episode, is built on the theme's structure. The variations are elaborate or minimal depending on the season, guest-directed or traditionally animated, fourth wall breaking or straightforwardly cartoon. But they all exist within the same sonic frame. The theme tells you where you are before the image tells you. You hear the first few notes, and something in your nervous system relaxes. You know where you are. You are in Springfield. You are home. This is not a small thing. The capacity of music to trigger specific emotional states through conditioned association is well documented. The Simpsons theme has had 36 years to build its associative network in the minds of its audience. 36 years of Sunday evenings, of that particular moment when the couch gag begins, when the family runs, when the sequence ends with the crash on the sofa and the theme resolves into its final notes. That sequence has happened hundreds of times for most dedicated viewers. Each repetition deepens the association. Each repetition adds another layer to the memory structure that the music now triggers. When you hear the theme unexpectedly in a grocery store, in a commercial, as a ringtone, you feel it. Not just recognize it, feel it. The associative network activates and you are briefly back in Sunday evenings. Back in whatever specific configuration of your life you were in when you watched the show. The music is a temporal transport device. It carries you backward through time with a specificity that most music cannot manage. Alf Clausen served as the show's primary composer for 27 seasons, scoring an extraordinary number of episodes and creating the musical language of Springfield in its most fully realized form. His work is worth appreciating in its own right, beyond its relationship to the narrative theories we have been exploring. The show has always been willing to deploy music in ways that push against the comedy rather than simply amplifying it, to let a quiet moment be quiet, to let an emotional scene breathe without musical commentary, to allow the music, when it comes, to be genuinely beautiful rather than merely functional. The scenes that the show's most devoted fans remember most clearly are often the ones where music does something unexpected. The closing of the Mother Simpson episode, where Homer sits alone in his car after Mona has fled again, watching the stars in silence while the music plays something so simple and so sad that it becomes almost unbearable. That scene has been cited by many viewers as one of the most emotionally affecting moments in the show's history. Not because of the dialogue or the plot mechanics, but because of the specific quality of what the music is doing in relation to the image and the silence around it. The show has songs, full production numbers that the show deploys with varying frequency across its run. Some of these are simply comedy musical jokes delivered with the show's characteristic precision and abandon, but others are more complex. They use the conventions of musical theater the way a song in a musical can express an interior state that dialogue cannot quite reach to do things that the normal register of the comedy would not accommodate. Sideshow Bob singing Gilbert and Sullivan, Burns performing his own version of a classic standard, Lisa's jazz improvisations, which the show takes seriously enough to depict with real musical sophistication. These musical moments are not ornamental. They are the show reaching for a register that is more emotionally direct than its usual mode. Music, as the show deploys it, is the place where Springfield's residents can say what they cannot say in dialogue. Where the defenses come down and the interior life becomes audible, the sounds of Springfield beyond the music are their own particular universe. The specific sound effect of Homer falling downstairs, the distinctive noise of the power plant's alarms, which appear frequently enough that they have become their own kind of auditory shorthand for impending catastrophe, the chiming sound that accompanies certain transitions, the particular ambient noise of the town traffic, crowd sounds, the particular quality of sound design that the show uses to establish that we are in a public space versus a private one. These sounds are not random. They are the product of decades of careful work by sound designers who understood that the auditory world of Springfield needed to be as specific and as consistent as its visual world. The show sounds like itself, has always sounded like itself. And that consistency, accumulated across hundreds of hours of content, creates the same kind of deep familiarity that the visual design creates. You could identify a Simpsons episode with your eyes closed. The sound of it is that distinctive. Under the coma theory, this acoustic specificity takes on additional meaning. Homer's dreaming brain is constructing a world not just from visual memories, but from sonic ones. The theme song is something he has heard from the television in the hospital room, perhaps as his family watches the show to fill the silence of the vigil. The ambient sounds of Springfield are assembled from Homer's stored memories of his actual neighborhood, his actual home, the actual sounds of the world he inhabited before the vending machine fell. His unconscious is building the dream from every sensory input it has available, and the sound design is part of that construction. The music that plays at the end of emotional episodes, the quiet, aching melodies that accompany the moments when the show sets comedy aside and simply is what it is, those might be Homer's brain reaching for something it cannot quite articulate. The emotion of loving your family and not being able to tell them. The grief of loss that is not death but absence. The specific ache of the coma, which is not pain exactly, but a kind of suspension, a being outside of time, a watching without being able to reach. The music carries all of that. It always has. Before any theory was ever written about it, the show made the music first, and the music has always known things about Springfield that the dialogue has only gradually gotten around to saying. Number. Section 18. The loneliness underneath what Springfield really feels. Every great American comedy contains a sadness. Not all American comedies, but the great ones. The ones that last. The ones that people keep returning to across years and decades. The ones that feel true in a way that goes beyond the laughter, that reach something underneath the comedy that the comedy is partially there to make bearable. M times A times S times H. Cheers. Arrested Development. 30 Rock. Parks and Recreation. Each of these shows has its sadness underneath the jokes. Each of them is about people trying to find connection and community in circumstances that make connection difficult. Each of them is, at some level, about loneliness and about the ways that humor and shared experience and the deliberate construction of chosen family can push back against loneliness even when it cannot fully defeat it. The Simpsons is about loneliness. This is not the first thing most people would say about it. It is a family show. In multiple senses, a show about a family, a show designed to be watched by families, a show that has been part of the fabric of Sunday evenings for families across the English-speaking world for 36 years. It is warm. It is funny. It loves its characters. It builds its comedy on the foundation of people who know each other so well that their interactions carry 36 years of accumulated history. But underneath all of that, underneath the warmth and the comedy and the family love, each character in the show is fundamentally alone in ways that the show depicts with consistent honesty. Homer is alone because his damage prevents him from fully reaching the people he loves. He feels the love. He expresses it in the ways available to him. But the gap between what he feels and what he can communicate, between what he wants for his family and what he can actually provide, between who he might have been and who Springfield made him that gap, is the space of his loneliness. He is inside his family and simultaneously unreachable from within it. Marge is alone because she has spent her life in service of other people's needs and has rarely had the experience of someone asking about hers. She is the person everyone leans on. She is the load-bearing wall of the Simpson household. And load-bearing walls do not get asked how they are doing. They get relied upon, and they hold, and the house stands, and the family is warm and sheltered inside it, and the wall simply continues to be what it is. Marge's loneliness is the loneliness of the person who makes everything possible for others and who sometimes wonders whether anyone notices. Not bitterly. She is not a bitter person, but quietly. In the moments when the house is empty and the noise has briefly stopped, Bart is alone because he has chosen a persona that keeps people at a manageable distance, and the persona has become so complete, so total, that finding the way back to the person underneath it, the kid who cries, who cares, who is more sensitive than anyone who only knows the class clown version of him, would believe requires an act of will that the show only occasionally asks of him. Lisa is alone because she is the smartest person in most rooms, and she has spent her entire life experiencing the particular loneliness that intelligence produces when it outpaces the available company. Not arrogance. Lisa is not arrogant about her intelligence. She would give anything to not be the smartest person in the room. She would give anything for a conversation that meets her at her level and stays there. The loneliness of the person who cannot turn their understanding off, who sees too much, who cares too much, who cannot stop asking the questions that everyone around them has agreed not to ask. Maggie is alone in the most complete and the most chosen way. She has selected aloneness as a strategy. She has made herself unreachable by choice, has built her silence as a wall that keeps her safe and keeps her free in the way that nothing else available to her could. Her loneliness is not painful in the way that the others is. It is purposeful. It is the aloneness of someone who has decided that connection on the terms available in Springfield is not worth the cost. And Ned is alone in the way that the truly good are often alone in communities that are not organized around goodness. He has been conditioned into a form of niceness that is also a form of isolation, a mode of being that prevents him from fully connecting with the people around him, because the conditioning prevents him from being fully present, fully himself, fully vulnerable in the way that genuine connection requires. His niceness is a wall, just as Bart's rebellion is a wall, just as Maggie's silence is a wall. Different materials, the same function. Springfield is a town full of people who cannot quite reach each other, who are all, in different ways, slightly separated from the connections they most need. The plant's output may be one cause of this. The collective denial may be another. The floating timeline certainly contributes. You cannot build deep relationships in a world where nothing accumulates, where every episode begins fresh, where the consequences of what happened last week have been cleared away by the reset. But the loneliness is also simply human. It is what you find when you look honestly at how people actually live. The gap between what we feel and what we can communicate. The distance between who we are and who our circumstances allow us to be. The specific grief of the person who loves their family and cannot quite reach them, who is present in the same room, and simultaneously somewhere they cannot be found. The Simpsons is one of the most honest portraits of this loneliness that American popular culture has produced. It is honest about it not through dramatic confrontation of the theme, but through the cumulative weight of thousands of small moments. The look on Homer's face when something he tried to give his family did not land the way he meant it to. The moment when Marge speaks and nobody hears her. The second when Bart lets something real show through the performance and then covers it so quickly that you are not sure you saw it. The many, many episodes where Lisa looks at the world around her with eyes that see everything and speak to someone who speaks back. These moments are not the show's subject, in the way that a drama's subject is its subject. They are something more ambient than that. They are the weather of Springfield, the atmospheric pressure of the world the show has built. You feel them rather than consciously analyze them. And they accumulate, over hundreds of episodes, over 36 years, into something that is less like watching a television show and more like being in a place that you know well enough to understand its moods. Springfield is lonely. The people in it are lonely, each in their own way, each managing the loneliness with the tools available to them. And the audience, the hundreds of millions of people who have watched the show across 3.5 decades, find something in that loneliness that is not just recognition, but relief. The specific relief of having your own interior state reflected back to you and not found shameful. Of seeing your family's complications depicted and found worthy of comedy and love rather than judgment. The show says, yes, this is hard. Being a person is hard. Being a family is hard. Loving people who are complicated and damaged and running on not quite enough of what they need is hard. And it is also funny. And it is also worth it. And the house on Evergreen Terrace will be there next week, and the family will be on the couch, and whatever terrible thing happened this episode will have been absorbed by the reset, and everyone will be okay. You will be okay. That is what the show has been saying underneath everything else for 36 years. Through the radiation, and the coma, and the shooting, and the immortality, and the geographic impossibility, and the collective denial, and the baby who is waiting, and the billionaire who refuses to die, and the father who cannot stop dreaming. Underneath all of it, underneath the theories and the mysteries and the evidence and the patterns, you will be okay. The family will be okay. Come back next week. We will all be here. We are always here. The light in the window on Evergreen Terrace never goes out. Springfield is always home. Number. Section 19. The Economics of Springfield Class. money, and the American dream. There is a conversation about economics running underneath every episode of The Simpsons that the show rarely pauses to name explicitly. But that shapes every storyline and every character relationship in ways that become visible once you start looking for them. The show is, among other things, a sustained portrait of what American working class and lower middle class life has looked like across 36 years of economic history. And what it has looked like is complicated, frequently precarious, and organized around a set of structural forces that the people living inside them rarely have either the tools or the energy to fully examine. Homer Simpson makes a specific income from his job at the nuclear power plant. The show has referenced his salary at various points, and the numbers vary with the floating timeline, but the general picture is consistent. He earns enough to own a house in a neighborhood, to feed a family of 5, to maintain a car, to indulge in the particular form of consumer excess that is his characteristic mode of self-comfort. He is not poor, in the absolute sense, but he is economically precarious in the way that most American working families are economically precarious, which is to say, one significant medical bill, one job loss, one major unexpected expense away from a situation that would be very difficult to recover from. The house on Evergreen Terrace represents a form of stability that the show treats with genuine affection while being honest about its fragility. The Simpsons own their house. This is supposed to be one of the achievements of the American working class property ownership as the foundation of economic security and social stability. But the show has depicted the house being endangered repeatedly. Burns has threatened it. Homer's financial decisions have threatened it. The economic pressures that accumulate around a household at Homer's income level have threatened it. The house is always there, but it is never entirely secure. The security is maintained episode by episode, barely, by the specific combination of Homer's employment and Marge's management and the reset mechanism that clears away consequences before they can fully accumulate. Burns's relationship to Homer's economic situation is the most explicit expression of the show's classe. Politics, Burns is extraordinarily wealthy. Homer is precariously comfortable. The power differential between them is absolute and structural. Burns determines whether Homer has a job. Burns determines the conditions under which Homer works. Burns determines the safety standards or the absence of them in the facility where Homer spends his working hours. Burns determines the wages that Homer brings home, which determine the quality of the food, the heat, the education, the medical care that Homer's family has access to. Homer is completely dependent on Burns for the material conditions of his family's life. And Burns knows this. Burns has always known this. The dependence is not incidental to their relationship, it is the foundation of it. It is the reason Homer keeps working at a facility with 342 safety violations. It is the reason Homer does not organize his coworkers. It is the reason Homer does not go to the press, does not go to the regulatory agencies, does not do any of the things that a person in full possession of their cognitive faculties and their economic independence might do when confronted with the conditions Homer works in every day. He cannot. He is not economically free to. The radiation may be making this worse, degrading the cognitive capacity that would allow Homer to clearly assess his situation. The coma may be reframing the whole thing as dream content rather than reality. But even without those explanatory frameworks, the basic economic picture is stark and familiar. A man with a family and a mortgage is not free in the way that a person without those responsibilities is free. He is constrained. He is managed. His risk tolerance is shaped by the knowledge that he cannot afford to lose the income that keeps his family housed and fed. Burns understands this. Burns has always understood this. The management of Homer's economic dependence, the grandpa deal, the retention of Homer through hundreds of documented errors, the specific structure of the power relationship between them is not accidental. It is the logical expression of Burns's understanding of how economic power works. You do not need to threaten people. You do not need to be actively cruel. You simply need to be the person who controls access to the income that makes their life possible, and they will do what you need them to do. Not because they are cowards, not because they are stupid, but because they are people with families, and people with families do not throw away the income that feeds those families unless the circumstances become absolutely untenable. Burns has spent a century ensuring that the circumstances in Springfield never quite become absolutely untenable for the people who work for him. The violations are numerous but not catastrophic enough to trigger mass action. The contamination is real but not immediately visible enough to produce the kind of clear-cut cause and effect that would organize resistance. The economic pressure is constant but not so acute that it breaks through the comfort of familiarity and routine into active desperation. He has calibrated it. That is the theory underneath the economic reading of the show. Burns has calibrated the conditions of Springfield's working class with the precision of a man who has been managing working-class dependents for over a century. Not through active malevolence in every moment, but through the structural design of a system that extracts maximum value from its workers while providing just enough material stability to prevent the kind of organized response that might threaten the system itself. This is not specific to fiction. This is a pattern that exists in the real economic history of the industrial United States, most visibly in the company town structures of the early 20th century, but persisting in attenuated forms through every subsequent decade. The company town is a specific structure in which a single employer controls not just employment, but housing, retail, services, and the social infrastructure of an entire community. Springfield is not technically a company town in the formal sense, but it functions like one. The power plant is the economic engine of the community. Burns is the engine's owner, and the relationship between the owner of the engine and the community that depends on it is not a relationship between equals. Lenny and Carl, Homer's co-workers, are worth a brief consideration in this context. They are, like Homer, men of working-class Springfield doing working-class Springfield work for working-class Springfield wages. They are smarter than Homer. The show depicts them with a noticeably higher baseline of functional intelligence. Lenny has a master's degree in nuclear physics, mentioned in passing in one episode, and never contradicted. Carl has a master's degree as well. Both of them are, by any reasonable measure, overqualified for the specific functions they perform at the plant, which means both of them have made the same calculus that Homer has made, without Homer's excuse of cognitive impairment. They have assessed their options, and they have decided that staying at the plant, at these wages, under these conditions, in this town, is better than the available alternatives. Perhaps the radiation has something to do with it. Perhaps the economic gravity of a stable job in a community where you have friends and history has something to do with it. Perhaps the same floating timeline mechanism that prevents consequence from accumulating also prevents the moment of clarity that would allow them to leave from fully developing into action. Or perhaps, more simply and more honestly, the economics of the real world that the show reflects do not actually provide many better alternatives. Lenny and Carl are fictional, but the people they represent are not. The people with qualifications who are doing work that does not fully use them, who are staying in situations that are not ideal because the alternatives are uncertain and the familiar is safe, those people are real, and they are everywhere. And The Simpsons has been depicting them with consistent accuracy since it began. The show's economic critique is not explicit. It does not deliver speeches or advocate positions. It depicts. It shows you Burns in his mansion above the town and Homer in his house on Evergreen Terrace, and the specific material relationship between them. And it trusts the audience to do the arithmetic. The arithmetic is not complicated. The person who owns the means of production has power over the people who operate the means of production. This is not a novel observation. It is the foundational observation of a significant tradition of economic analysis. The show illustrates it with yellow characters and donut jokes, which does not make it less true. The American dream that Springfield represents is the version of the American dream that the show's target audience, the working and lower middle class of late 20th and early 21st century America, has actually experienced. Not the version where hard work and talent produce economic mobility and security. The version where hard work and talent produce a house on Evergreen Terrace, a car in the driveway, 3 kids, and a job that is not what you would have chosen if you had been given a genuine choice, maintained through a combination of habit and dependence and the accumulated cost of leaving being higher than the accumulated cost of staying. It is not a bad life. Homer's life is not a bad life. The show has always been clear about this. The family is real, the love is real. The couch and the television and the Saturday at the bowling alley and the Friday night with a beer and a game, these things matter. They are not the consolation prize for a failed version of something better. They are the thing itself. The actual substance of a working-class American life, with all its limitations and all its genuine pleasures. But the show has also always been honest about who profits from that life most, who benefits from Homer's willingness to stay, Who depends on the economic calculus that keeps Homer at the plant despite the 342 violations, and the radioactive waste on the playground, and the glowing supervisor in the woods? And that person, that ancient, almost dead, radiation-sustained, system-building person, is always in the same place, at the top, where he has always been, where he will always be, because he has spent a century making sure there is no structural mechanism capable of moving him. Number. Section 20. What we leave behind, the legacy of Springfield. Every cultural artifact eventually becomes legacy. Every show that runs long enough crosses a threshold where it stops being simply a current thing and becomes a historical one, where it is assessed not just on what it is doing now, but on what it has done, what it has meant, what trace it has left in the culture that encountered it. The Simpsons crossed that threshold years ago, and the conversation about its legacy is already well underway. Books have been written. Academic courses have been taught. The show has been analyzed from the perspective of economics, philosophy, literary theory, sociology, religious studies, and political science, among others. Its influence on subsequent animation is so pervasive as to be nearly impossible to fully document every animated comedy that came after it was made in a world that The Simpsons had already shaped. But legacy is also personal. The cultural footprint of a show is not just the aggregate of its academic analyses and its influence on subsequent work. It is also the individual memories of the people who watched it, the specific configuration of moments that each viewer carries, the episodes that landed differently depending on who you were when you watched them, the characters who meant something particular to you, for reasons that may or may not align with what they mean in the aggregate analysis. People who grew up watching The Simpsons in the 1990s have a specific relationship to it that people who came to the show later cannot entirely share. Not because the later relationship is less valid, but because the earlier one was formed in a specific context, a context in which the show was actively shaping cultural conversation in real time, in which a Simpsons reference was a form of social currency, in which watching the show was an act of participation in something that the culture around you was also participating in. The show was not background then. It was foreground. It was the thing people talked about at school on Monday morning. That specific quality of cultural presence has faded, as it inevitably must for any show that runs long enough. The Simpsons is now the background, the inherited text, the canonical archive, the thing that shaped the people who shape the shows that the current audience is most actively engaged with. It is the urtext of American animated comedy, the foundation that everything built on top of it takes for granted. This is not diminishment. This is what it looks like when a cultural artifact successfully passes from foreground to legacy. When it becomes part of the furniture of the cultural imagination rather than an object of active attention, the furniture does not stop being real when you stop noticing it. It continues to hold things up, it continues to shape the room. And occasionally when a Simpsons clip from 1997 lines up with something in the news, or when someone who has not thought about the show in years hears the theme song and feels something, or when a parent sits down with a child to watch the show and finds themselves experiencing it on two levels simultaneously, the comedy in the foreground and the depth they did not notice the first time, underneath occasionally, the furniture becomes visible again, the object of attention again, the thing in the foreground rather than the background. These moments of renewed visibility are what the theories live in. They are the moments when someone looks at the show with fresh attention and finds that it rewards the attention more than they expected. When the three-eyed fish and the coma and the shooting and the immortal billionaire stop being background details of a familiar comedy and become something else, clues, evidence, the pieces of a larger picture that the show has been assembling for 36 years. The legacy of The Simpsons is not settled. It will not be settled for a long time, because the show is still running, still adding to its archive, still generating the material that will become the subject of analysis and memory and theory. The conversation about what it means is ongoing. The meaning itself is still accumulating. What we can say with confidence, sitting here at 36 years and 788 episodes and counting, is that the show has done something remarkable. It has held a mirror up to American life across an extraordinary span of cultural time and kept the mirror steady while everything else moved. The politics have changed, the economics have changed, the technology has changed beyond recognition. The specific texture of daily life in America has been transformed by forces that nobody in 1989 could fully anticipate. And through all of that, on Evergreen Terrace, things have stayed the same. Homer is still 39, Bart is still 10, the plant is still cracked, Burns is still in his office, Marge is still in the kitchen, Maggie is still watching. The constancy is the legacy. The specific, deliberate, maintained constancy of a world that says, whatever happens out there, in here it is the same. Come in. Sit down. The family is on the couch. The couch gag is playing. The theme song is playing. And for 22 minutes, the world outside will do what it is going to do, and in here it will be the same as it always was, and you will be home. That is what 36 years of Sunday evenings adds up to. That is what 788 episodes, every scandal and every mystery and every theory and every reset and every three-eyed fish and every glowing billionaire and every silent baby and every dreaming father, all of it adds up to. Home. The idea of it. The promise of it. The stubborn, impossible, radiation-soaked, coma-maintained, collectively agreed upon, floating timeline-sustained promise that home exists, that it can be returned to, that it will be exactly as you left it. Springfield is that promise, and we have been keeping it, Sunday after Sunday for 36 years. We will keep keeping it. The light is on. Come home. Number. Section 21. The rules Springfield plays by and the ones it breaks. Every fictional world operates according to rules. Some of those rules are explicit, stated within the text of the work itself. Others are implicit, understood by the audience through accumulated exposure, through the patterns of what happens and what does not happen, through the specific logic of the world's cause and effect structure. The best fictional worlds have internal consistency. They may operate on premises that differ radically from the real world, but within those premises they are coherent. The rules, once established, are followed. Springfield's rules are among the most studied and most debated in the history of American television, precisely because the show has been running long enough that its rules have had time to develop, to be tested, to be violated, and to be reconstituted in the aftermath of those violations. The show has rules that it follows absolutely and rules that it has broken with varying degrees of consequence. Understanding which is which tells you something important about what the show is actually trying to do. The rule that the show has followed most absolutely across every episode of its entire run is the rule of the family. The Simpsons family will not be permanently broken. Homer and Marge will not permanently separate, despite the many episodes in which their marriage is under genuine strain. Bart and Lisa will not permanently lose their sibling relationship. Maggie will not permanently leave the family unit. The family as a configuration, these 5 specific people in this specific house on this specific street, is inviolable. Episodes may threaten it. Storylines may push it to the edge. But the family always reassembles, always holds, always ends the episode in the configuration it began. This is the deepest rule of Springfield. Deeper than the floating timeline, deeper than the reset mechanism, deeper than any of the specific narrative conventions that govern individual episodes. The family is the thing that cannot be lost, and the show has maintained this with remarkable discipline across 3.5 decades. The rule that the show breaks most regularly, the rule whose violation is so frequent and so accepted that most viewers have stopped registering it as a violation, is the rule of consequence. Actions in Springfield do not accumulate consequences. Homer can destroy a car and have a different car in the next episode without explanation. A friendship can be shattered in an episode and be restored in the next without reference to the shattering. A relationship can be built over the course of a season and then effectively disappear from the next season's landscape without goodbye. Consequences in Springfield are episodic. They last for exactly as long as the episode that generated them. This is the floating timeline's most direct, practical expression. The timeline floats because consequences cannot accumulate without aging the characters, and aging the characters would break the family rule by making the family into something different from what it has always been. So consequences float with the timeline. They arrive, they are experienced, they resolve, they are gone. But there is a third category of rule, and this is the one the theories live in. The rules that the show appears to be following, but that, on close examination, are actually being followed in ways that are more complex and more meaningful than they first appear. The rule that characters do not age, which is not just a production convention, but a structural expression of the coma theory, or the radiation theory, or the collective denial. The rule that the plant's violations never result in regulatory action, which is not just narrative convenience, but a portrait of how institutional capture actually works. The rule that burns always wins, which is not just cartoon logic about the persistence of villains, but an economic and political observation about the durability of entrenched wealth. The rules of Springfield are not arbitrary. They are each, under examination, expressions of something about the show's understanding of the world it depicts. The family rule says, some things can survive anything if the love is real enough. The consequence rule says, in communities like this one, consequences tend not to accumulate for the people who matter, which is both a narrative convenience and a social observation. And the deeper structural rules, the ones the theories articulate, say, here is how power works, here is how contamination works, here is how a mind in crisis works, here is how a community maintains its preferred version of reality. Springfield's rules are its worldview. And the worldview, once you understand it fully, is not a comfortable one. It is honest, it is frequently loving. It has warmth in it that is genuine rather than performed. But it does not pretend that the world rewards goodness or punishes wrongness with any regularity. It does not pretend that institutions function as they are supposed to function. It does not pretend that the people with the most power are the people with the most merit. It shows you Springfield as it is, as America, in many of its most characteristic expressions, actually is. And it finds, in that honestly depicted world, something worth loving, something worth returning to, something worth spending 36 years inside. The rules say, this is how it works. The love says, and we are here anyway. And the combination of those two things, the honest depiction of difficulty and the persistent warmth in spite of it, is what makes the show what it is, what it has always been, what it will continue to be for however many more Sundays remain. Springfield plays by the rules it has, and so do we. That is the final thing the theories tell us, not about the show, about ourselves. That we have been watching Springfield long enough and carefully enough to see the rules underneath the surface, to see the patterns in the evidence, to connect the three-eyed fish to the cooling towers and the cooling towers to Homer's crayon, and the crayon to Mona's absence, and Mona's absence to the man in the mansion above the town who started all of it with a grudge and has been maintaining the consequences of that grudge through every episode since. We saw it, we looked, we paid attention. We did what Springfield, flooded with radiation and managed into compliance and collectively voting to forget, cannot do for itself. We asked the questions, and the asking, the 36 years of fan theories and Reddit threads and deep dives and annotated episode guides and long late-night conversations about what the show is really saying, is itself a kind of love letter to the show, to the family, to the yellow town with the cracked cooling towers and the three-eyed fish and the sleeping father and the waiting baby and the immortal billionaire at the top. We see you, Springfield. We have always seen you. We are still watching. Number. A final note. On watching and being watched. There is one last thing worth saying before we close the door on Evergreen Terrace and let the night settle back into quiet. The Simpsons watches us back. This is not a mystical claim. It is a structural observation about what happens when a cultural artifact has been embedded in the life of its audience long enough. The show has absorbed 36 years of the world watching it. It has been shaped by the responses it received, adjusted by the criticism it generated, influenced by the conversations its audience has had about it. The theories that fans developed, the coma theory, the radiation theory, all the frameworks we have explored tonight fed back into the show's awareness of itself. The writers know the theories. They have referenced them. They have played with them, nudged them, occasionally appeared to respond to them in the text of episodes that arrived years after the theories first circulated. The audience shaped the show, and the show shaped the audience, and the 36-year feedback loop between them has produced something that neither could have generated alone. The Springfield that exists in the cultural imagination, the Springfield of the theories, of the fan analyses, of the long midnight conversations about what the show is really saying, is not identical to the Springfield the writers intended in any given episode. It is larger than that. It is the accumulated product of millions of minds engaging with the same material across decades, each bringing their own experience and their own understanding, each finding something in it that the writers may or may not have put there deliberately. This is what art does when it works. It becomes more than its makers made. It grows in the space between the work and the audience. It accumulates meaning through use, through repetition, through the specific ways that people's lives intersect with it. The Simpsons has had 36 years to grow. And it has grown. The Springfield you carry with you, the specific version of it that exists in your memory, assembled from the episodes you watched at the age you watched them, filtered through everything that has happened in your life since that Springfield is yours. It is not identical to anyone else's Springfield. It could not be, because the audience's specific, individual histories are the medium through which the show's meaning is transmitted. What we have been doing tonight, walking through the theories, sitting with the mysteries, finding the patterns in the accumulated evidence of 788 episodes, is one version of engaging with what Springfield means. There are other versions. The person who watches the show for comfort during difficult periods and does not think about theories at all. The person who knows every episode by heart and can cite the air date and the showrunner of any given segment. The person who came to the show through a parent or a sibling and experienced it first as a family activity rather than a solo one. The person who encountered it late and found in its archive a record of an America they were not quite alive to experience firsthand. All of these versions of Springfield are real. All of these relationships to the show are valid. The theories do not supersede the other ways of loving the show. They add to them. They are one more way of saying, this meant something. This is worth paying attention to. This yellow, impossible, cracked and leaking town is worth taking seriously. And the show, in its own way, through the Easter eggs and the background details and the accumulated weight of its best episodes and the occasional flash of genuine, unexpected depth, the show agrees with us. Take it seriously. It will reward you. It has always rewarded the people who looked closely. The light in the window on Evergreen Terrace. It is still on. It was always on. Good night.